Okay,
Hello
good.
and welcome to my podcast. There is Liu, and today I'm joined by Mike Buhl. So welcome
Well, thanks,
to the
Larry.
podcast.
Awesome to be.
There's of course a lot of directions that we could go into, but I wanted to start with like the Twitter thread that I shared with you recently
Yeah, yeah.
regarding the structure of the cities. So you have basically the North American cities that have extensive amount of urban sprawl,
Hmm.
and where the distance between buildings, right, between residential and business and shopping areas, and hospitals and so forth, is quite large. Largely,
Massive. Yeah.
yeah,
Massive, right?
yeah, because there's a preference that the American people have towards owning your own house.
Mhm.
You're owning basically literally your own four walls, and you want to have a garden attached to that. And the implication is that you cannot have as much of a lively shop culture if you compare the European cities where um, they have usually like medium height buildings, like that go up 5 or 6 floors.
Mhm.
And the top floors would be the residential, like apartments. And then the first floor would be the shops, right?
Yeah.
Like you have cafes, you have restaurants, you have
Bakeries.
bakeries and so forth. Yeah.
Mhm.
And then of course these are very lively places, particularly during the summertime, spring, fall seasons. With climate change, it's getting warmer, so people are spending quite some time outside, and then it feels very lively. Um, and also interestingly, I mean, if you look at the net tourist flows, right, between North America and Europe, both places, I know pretty well, both of us know well.
Hmm.
You notice that there's oftentimes more American tourists that are going to Europe than the other way around.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I think part of it is that like if you look at ticket prices, I mean, if you purchase like a two-way ticket from Europe, I mean, I think it's like you can find 400 or 500 euros. You can find a ticket. If I do the same thing from here, going over there, I think last time I went, it was like $1,300.
Oh, wow.
So it is quite a significant price difference. Um, and maybe also the dollar is a little bit stronger now than the euro, so maybe that's a factor. Um, but also it's like if you travel to European city, you know that you don't need a rental car. I mean,
Mm.
you could just
Use a
hop on a
train.
train and then you can go between these countries, between these cities. And also if once you are in those cities, like if you get off at the central station, right, the Hauptbahnhof in the German-speaking countries,
Hmm.
you're right in the center, right? You can just walk to um, you know, basically the inner city, visit the churches, do the sightseeing, right? And then you can grab a cafe, right? And
We can read a book.
read a book. That's right. Yeah. And yeah, and it's very connected to the central town square. Walking is quite easy. Um, and I saw these pre-post photos of some of the European cities, like Paris was one of those that were mentioned, where they went from kind of like highways to like big streets with like two or three lanes in one direction. They kind of reduced the lanes for the cars, and they're
Hmm.
expanding the green space and the bicycle paths and the footpath. Um, and Yeah, it becomes a more lively city.
Yeah.
And now, then the thing is, well, okay, well, if you're an American mayor, right,
Hmm.
and you're trying to copy that playbook from the European cities, um, there's going to be several barriers you're going to face. I mean, it's not just an NIMBYism, right? Like people don't, what the hell are you going to be doing, right? Taking away my car. And also because I think the density of the population is too low over here.
Yeah.
All of these programs that make a livable city, right? Bike paths, public transportation, um, and footpath, right? Pedestrian zones. All of these things you cannot do if you don't increase the density, right?
Yeah, it's a major structural barrier that you look at a place like Texas and you look at a place like Dallas or even Houston. It's 40, 50 years of this low population density where everything is spread out. So it would literally take 50, 60 years to reverse that. I don't know uh, the magnitude of money investment, but with European cities, you have what, 100 years of it growing together, or not more. And all of this subsidies, the state subsidies and the investment in the infrastructure. So I mean, when I look at a place like Dallas is a great testing ground. I mean, you can see 40, 50 years of thinking the automobile is the mode of transportation and never thinking about really public transportation options, that you have then a chaos, you have disaster in the making. And it's just so far spread out. And it would literally, if you think about the cities, they would have to pool resources. I don't know how they would do it just city by city. They have to literally almost pool their municipality resources. It seems like to me, my observation is a lot more of the affluent cities are able to provide some bike lanes. So, for instance, suburbs like Richardson, Texas, where I live, and they do, but the poor cities south of Dallas often don't have those same things like bike lanes, right? It's just not money. There's no funding there, right? So yeah, it's a major concern, uh, especially with this, hot heat and more and more highways being built, and more cars. So yeah, it's definitely something to compare contrast to Europe on the one hand and US, a lot of US cities.
And then even if you do
Mm.
like the within US comparison, I mean, I spoke with a colleague. I mean, he actually lived in the where you lived around, I think, Plano,
Yeah.
in Texas,
Mm.
and now he's a professor with me here in Baltimore,
Wow.
and he said that the he's actually able to get around quicker even down in Texas, and this was surprising to me because
Yeah.
because in the northeastern cities, I mean, things are more compact.
Yeah.
Than in Texas. But he said that in Texas, I mean, you have like freeways essentially
Yeah.
that have that carry most of the traffic versus in the Baltimore city, especially if you have to go through the downtown area or even in our
Tunnel,
area in
right?
the suburbs. You take the local roads
Hmm.
and you have like traffic light networks, right? So sometimes like if you want to go from A to B and you have to cross, let's say, 10 traffic lights, chances are that maybe three of them are going to be red. So you're going to have to wait for a bit. Um, and um, and so that obviously adds the commute time. And then also like if you do take the highway, which is the beltway that goes around the city. Yeah, if you live, um, like if you live in a place where you had to go through the beltway, the rush hour is just going to be, you know,
Hmm.
terrible time to be at, right? Because
Oh yeah.
not going to be able to get ahead.
It's
Um,
increased, definitely. I mean, yeah. The amount of time that people spend commuting has increased, and yeah, it's takes up a huge portion of people's time just to commute. Uh, yeah, so it's a concern.
Yeah, but in some cities, I mean, some of the northeastern cities, I mean, I'm thinking like Boston, New York, and DC.
Hmm.
Um, at least like they have a developed subway system, right?
Hmm.
So, I remember, I mean, like that area around close to the like Pentagon, just like outside, I guess Arlington.
Yeah.
Um, I drove past it on that highway on the Beltway, and then also took the subway to the Ronald Reagan Airport, which is in the Arlington region. And yeah, and of course it is a big difference, right? Because with the subway, you just get to your destination on time.
Hmm.
But with, if you were to take that same route, driving on the highway,
Oh, it'll take forever.
yeah, you're gonna be stuck there for a while. And I mean, the cars are moving, but still,
Yeah.
you're still gonna be moving there very slowly.
I have to ask, in the Northeast, isn't parking also kind of like a business too? I mean, the cities uh also use that as a revenue. Is that still a thing? You know, the parking itself, the parking of the vehicle and where you're able to park, you know, have to pay to park in a lot of Northeast cities. In Dallas too. I mean, there's areas where people get charged to park, but I wonder if that is a big thing too. Prevents people from, you know, using public transportation if they have to use their vehicle to get to the public transportation. And then people calculate in their mind, you know, is it worth it? Because I got to pay for the parking. And I don't know if that's a problem in the Northeast, the
Yeah, well,
parking.
we do have a lot of like parking
Yeah.
meters all
Yeah.
throughout the downtown area.
Uh-huh.
Like right where my campus is, I think it is more suburban, so still, so we don't have parking meters over there. But they usually have like the signs that say, well, we don't want you to park more than like 2 hours,
Yeah.
right? If you unless you have a permit. So if you have
Mhm.
like the registered your car as a kind of local resident, then you get the permit for which you probably pay for that
Yeah.
permit, and then you can put your car there for a long time. For people from the outside, they say, oh, it's a 2 hour limit, but I'm not sure how they would
Hmm.
enforce that.
Yeah.
Because I've sometimes used these like
Mhm.
unmetered parking spaces, sometimes longer than 2 hours, and it's probably not an issue.
That's good. I use that as a comparison because I have a relative that lives in Munich, you know. And Munich, they have these side streets where, yeah, for like 90 minutes or 60 minutes, it's supposed to be kind of free for everybody, you know. But if you look at places like Philadelphia, uh, you know, I went to one meeting, academic meeting, and you literally had all of these coin machines, or you had to pay for the time allotment that you're staying. So it seems like there's also these companies that pop up, you know, these parking companies that uh, make a living off of this parking issue. And I remembered even when I was, you know, a student or talking even to other students, people would always get irritated because they had to pay a lot of money sometimes to park, you know, a week or a month. And even when they paid, it wasn't guaranteed that they have a parking space. So, yeah, big cash cow, I guess you can say, for some cities. And it's been, you know, it's been scrutinized where the money goes and if it's you know, some corruption, things like that. But yeah, big concern, you know, especially in areas where there's lots of people living together, right? Uh, Population density
Yeah, I
and
mean,
very
parking is
little.
a major issue. Yeah, so
Yeah.
where
I
where to find it?
yeah, I don't know how it is in Vienna. I'm curious. If they give preferences for EV parking over you know, they have smaller parking lots where they make arrangements for people to use e-bikes even, you
Yeah,
know.
that infrastructure it exists. When I was there back last summer, they did have um these special parking spots that are close to next to these charging stations. So you could plug in your vehicle, and and it's connected with the municipal energy company.
Oh,
So,
wow.
but you have to. I mean, it's not just like a free plugin. So you
Yeah,
would
yeah.
have to, maybe link it with your credit card, and then just make sure that like, you gonna get charged with
Yeah,
however much electricity you charged with. And but those opportunities increasingly
exist, huh?
exist, but it's still inefficient. You consider, I mean, because if you have a city in our downtown area, like we have like five, six, sometimes seven-story buildings. So that's a significant population density, and and you always have these like parking spots that go around the block, right?
Hmm.
And there's not a lot of parking spots. I mean, if you think about it, I mean, if you have like say one block of housing where um I mean, how many you can maybe park 40 cars or something, right? Around the
Hmm.
block. Which I mean, considering the population density within those blocks, it's gonna be very difficult to find the parking. I
Hmm.
mean, my father used to own
Space,
a
right?
car back in Vienna, and
Uh-huh.
you would pay for the permit parking.
Hmm.
Um, and with the permit parking, as you said, I mean, it's still not guaranteed that you find a parking spot.
Hmm.
The parking permit is just saying that your car will never be towed if you park in that neighborhood. That's all it
Yeah,
means. But it doesn't guarantee you a parking spot. So sometimes you did have to search for quite a bit. Uh,
yeah.
uh,
It, I, yeah, I mean, for us as, sociologists, we can kind of see that the vehicle itself produces a manufactured risk, and it kind of the way we design our cities around the vehicle, the city, you need parking space for it, you have to produce the highways for it, and you can see then what problems this creates when it environmental problems, for instance, and
yeah, and
with
then
all
if
this.
yeah, so
Go
if you
ahead.
drive by York Road, which is the main road that connects the center city Baltimore with the suburb in the north,
Hmm.
and it's basically, I would say, maybe every fifth shop that you can see on that major road is going to be like car repair shop, basically, right?
Oh, wow.
I mean,
Yeah.
I don't have the statistic
No, no,
numbers,
no, I believe
but
you.
it's just like it feels like it is that dense, right?
Yeah,
Like car repair, or like tire
yeah.
repair shop or whatever, something like that.
So, but Baltimore has also, I guess, air emission testing requirements, right? You have to
Yes,
test
yes.
inspection.
Yeah, so you have like
Uh,
I think it's called like it's some kind of environmental assessment,
hmm.
and you just plug in your um
Yeah,
like your car to that cable, and then they
yeah,
see, oh, how much emissions your car is producing or something like that.
yeah. So here in Texas, there was a reversal. I believe the legislature passed rural areas are now exempt from emission testing and inspection requirement. The urban counties still are required. So imagine, what kind of environmental concerns that may produce when you have a lot of the rural areas, they don't have to get their cars or trucks inspected anymore. They just have to pay the fee, the tax for the inspection sticker. But the urban areas do. So like Dallas County, Tarrant County, and I believe the Houston area. Isn't it interesting and crazy at the same time? I'm critiquing my own state that I live in, but uh, think about it. No more emissions testing. Uh, is that the
Yeah,
way to
yeah,
go?
yeah. So emissions testing, yeah, I mean, it is definitely one part of the
Yeah,
infrastructure that is needed, and then the other thing is, of course, like the car insurance, right? Where
yeah, yeah.
Like that rate keeps on, increasing quite
It
substantial rate.
it does. It
Um,
really does. You have to watch them.
yeah, yeah,
Not, yeah, yeah. It's
yeah.
a
I've noticed that. And yeah, and then as we mentioned, the car repairs, and
Mhm,
also like the increased risk of accidents, right? Like,
mhm,
I mean, if you take like in Vienna, I mean, if I take the public transportation with which it takes about an hour to basically move around the every part of the city,
mhm.
and the accident risk is quite low, I would say, right?
Yeah.
You just hop on and the bus or the train, and it
It's
takes you
it's
to where you need to go.
it's probably also beneficial for the aging population that makes up increasingly, a large segment of European society that they prefer public transportation. You know, I can imagine, I mean, if you get more older in the US, let's say you're in your 80s, uh, you can pass the test. Maybe you can renew your driver's license, but it may be a risk factor, after, uh, not to say that anything against people that are older, but let's just say that it's a greater risk maybe in getting an accident or something, or vision might be a problem, right? But if you don't have then an option, if you're elderly and you need to go to the grocery store, like here in Texas, you don't have a public transportation option, then you're reliable on your car and vehicle, whether you're, you have vision problems or not. And that has been a concern. Here we have silver alerts. I don't know if you ever heard of silver alerts, and they're all over the billboards, highways often. So silver alerts are basically elderly people that have maybe a case of Alzheimer's or dementia, and they start driving, and their loved ones are worried, and they do a silver alert. Um, I've never seen that in Europe. Like actually messages for silver. I know that sometimes they have issues and they communicate that to the police, local police, Polizei or something, But imagine because everybody is dependent on vehicles here, that also creates a lot of problems, runaways, road rage, the list goes on, all sorts of crime done, hit and run accidents, that's a big thing. Uh, so yeah, if
Yeah,
flooding is an issue too here. So whenever there's lots of rain, flooding, it causes issues because people drive through the flooding and it causes fatalities. And drinking and driving, there's alcoholics that also cause accidents. So and we don't think of it. Public transportation, you probably have also people that drink, but because they have this access to public transportation, it's somewhat safer. Even with all that soccer crowds, if you think about right now in Europe, they have what, EU championship,
the European Cup, yeah.
which Austria won, right? One of the games.
Won the game against
Good luck.
Poland. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but can you imagine the flow of fans? A lot of those that do drink, they're able to manage that because they have all these railways that go in and out. I can, which I think it reduces the risk of people that do drink or something that they don't get in a vehicle or that can cause an accident. Yeah, so that's one of the benefits I think of public transportation. It reduces
Yeah.
the risk.
Yeah,
Uh,
public transportation, I think it's definitely, I mean, it makes sense, but again, it's not
mhm,
something that you can
yeah,
enforce in the US unless, you can convince people that, it's okay to live in a, big apartment building, right?
yeah,
And I had one of my, uh, colleagues, who was like, well, you don't want to live in an apartment building because you're gonna have neighbors that are, like drug addicts, and
mhm,
they're going to um disturb you, and things like that. And so, and it's, I mean, of course, I mean, if you make the most negative assumptions about people, now, I mean, I'm not saying that it doesn't happen at all. I think it can happen, um, in some neighborhoods. But to have like this blanket concern that, well,
Mm,
most people are going to be problematic if they, um, if you crowd them together in the same, apartment complex.
mm,
um, that I mean, that like negative vision about human nature, right?
yeah,
I mean, of course, it's going to influence your choices regarding housing. Then you say, well, okay, I want to have, then my own house, or, at most like a maybe like a townhouse or something. Um, and there you go. You have a self-fulfilling prophecy, because then you're not able to, reduce and, the car dependence. You're not able to create
yeah.
these public transit networks. You're not able to create lively downtown areas, right?
And reduce the cost of living. That would, you know, uh, do you think that the cultural norms, the attitude, let's say in Europe, I kind of see this idea that if a family has children, that the children usually live with their parents much longer. It's no taboo. Maybe someone is 40 or 40 years old and still living at home. However, in the US, there's this pressure and norm to think of children should leave the home at 18, that they should, unless they have uh are studying in college, there's an exemption made, but the attitude might be in the US that they should leave the home, in
Well,
their
actually, I
20s,
think,
definitely not 30s or 40s like in Europe.
yeah, no, actually, if you look at the numbers, I mean, I think the
Yeah.
most individualistic countries are actually the Scandinavians, like,
Yeah, yeah,
the
yeah.
Swedes and the Danes,
Uh,
because their welfare state is so large that
yeah,
they would oftentimes subsidize, um, let's say students who wanted to live away from the parents. They might be going to college in a different city than where the parents live. And so they have to find their own apartment, which is oftentimes subsidized.
yeah,
So actually, in those Scandinavian countries, you have the lowest rates of adolescents that are living with their parents. Where for the US, actually, I mean, I would say we are probably in the midfield.
think so.
And
Yeah,
yeah, within the OECD countries, and there's actually quite a significant portion of the population, adolescents, living with their parents, um, young adults.
mm,
And I think it just simply, I don't think it reflects kind of strong family norm solidarity and things like that. Because we're still a largely individualistic culture. Um, I think it just reflects that the social security systems are much worse over here.
yeah,
And if you look at the income wealth of the, millennial and the Gen Z, um, like so if you look at the nominal wages, it is actually higher than it was, for the boomers and the Xers. Um, but maybe, I don't know, there's a perception that actually the living standards are declining, that, things are becoming more expensive
mm,
to live with. So, um, yeah, like if you look at the desirable places where most of the jobs are, the rents are quite high, right? And so it means that that people are, the adolescents and the young adults are more likely to live with their parents. So
yeah. As a
that
necessity,
yeah, as a
Yeah,
necessity, right? Exactly.
so,
So and that way, I mean, yeah, it's yeah, we don't see a lot of um the young adults moving out. And then within the European context, so it's basically north south, right? So basically, the further south you go, and also Eastern Europe, like the former communist countries, um, then you have, a higher percentage of young adults living with their parents, right?
yeah,
Um, and yeah, so it's, I mean, the right policy. I mean, like, so if you if you wanted the now this is another normative question, right? Where it's like, I mean, is it desirable for young adults? Should they be moving out from the parents' house? Um, it's really a normative question, but I would say that for those who do want to move out, right, they should have the opportunity to do so. So I would say, so I don't think that we should create a norm where people are expected to move out of the parents' house.
Hmm.
Um, but I also think that for those who do want it, who who want to have the financial means to do so, should be able to do it, right? Yeah,
Yeah.
that's kind of
Voluntary, yeah.
have to be. Yeah,
Yeah.
and I mean, okay, well, what does it mean? I mean, so there's a discussion about rent control. I think some cities,
Hmm.
they're like where the rents are going up a lot, they are in favor of limiting the rent rises. I'm not in favor of those policies, because because the price of the rent, I mean, it is a signal in the market, right? Like it is a signal for like housing being scarce, right? So you have basically a lot of people, right? A lot of population, and you don't have enough housing stock.
Mm.
And then if you are
Supply demand,
limiting,
huh? Yeah.
yeah, it's a supply demand thing. So if you are limiting the rent rises, um, then what happens is that, yeah, I mean, you don't solve the underlying shortage of the housing, right? So basically, you're gonna have the people that live in the who have apartments. Well, they're gonna be okay because the rent is, because they have a place to stay and the rent does not go up, right?
Hmm.
But then let's say if you're like a young person, you're a young person, you're still living with your parents, you're looking for an apartment, but again, the underlying issue is that there's not enough housing. That's why the prices were so high, the rents. But now, if you hold the rent rises down, then the developers, they're
Yeah.
saying, well, okay, I'm not making enough profit to to build this kind of housing, to build new housing stock. So you're going to have low housing stock, and even with the rent regulations, so you're going to have a lot of people who are like, well, I'm going to have to live with my parents because there's no other choice.
Mm.
So
Yeah, it has unintended consequences. Yeah, definitely.
yeah,
Yeah.
so that's why I'm not in favor of limiting rent increases. What I'm in favor of is like the Viennese housing program, right? Where they're saying that basically
Mhm.
the municipality itself invests in the housing stock. So they hold the housing stock. And now, if you're like a Milton Friedman free market guy, you're,
Chicago school, huh?
yeah, you don't like that idea. Also, the fact that like you're never gonna own like public housing, right? So if like let's say if I lived in like public housing in Vienna, which yeah, I've done for many years, um, like there's no way how you can purchase the apartment that you live in, right? Because it's a municipally owned
Yeah.
housing, so you pay rent into perpetuity as long as you live there. But you have to notice that, and I always like to say that the rental rate, let's say 400 euros a month.
Hmm.
Um, if you do private rental, it's at least double that, 800, sometimes even three times 1,200 or so, right?
Yeah.
So that's the first big
Euros,
difference.
right? Euros, right?
Euros, yeah, all in euros.
Yeah.
Now, if you compare, right, so like the cheapest way of living in the US is you purchased your house, so you already paid off whatever the mortgage, the
Hmm.
mortgage, so basically the house price plus the interest to the bank, right? That's the cheapest way how you could live, right? At that point, you'll be paying the, like the utility bills, like internet cable, and then plus the property taxes and the house insurance, right?
Which the property taxes are often unpredictable. I mean, they go also can exceed, you know,
They,
for
they
some
get
property owners in places where the value of the houses are high, and so the taxes are higher.
yeah.
Some like
So
in some state, I don't know what state, some states have different formulas, but like in Texas, that was a problem. It accelerated you know, the value of the homes estimates, and then that made the taxes higher for people that they didn't estimate. Those taxes are often more than the actual insurance and whatever leftover fees they have, like homeowners insurance. So if they had to pay like $4 or $5,000 in taxes, but the insurance is only, you know, $1,000, it's still, there's a more of it going to taxes, you know, because taxes is what I think pays for the schools in some states. I don't know. Here in Texas, the schools get paid for through homeowner taxes.
that's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So if you calculate all of that together, I mean, I would say that you would still be spending more on a house that you paid off,
Hmm.
that you own,
And you would rent it.
than like a rental apartment in Vienna. Now, the counter argument would be, you get more space. I mean, sure. I mean, so in like in Vienna, you're just gonna get in the 70 square meter apartment, which is basically a two-bedroom apartment.
Yeah.
And if you own a house over here, you're gonna have like your backyard,
Mhm.
and you're gonna have like your own structure basically, and maybe more rooms. Um, so okay, but nonetheless, I mean, in terms of just like the cost of sustaining yourself, right, is still significantly higher over in the U.S.
Mhm.
If you do everything like
Yeah.
private market, right?
Oh
And
yeah.
then of course, if you do rental, then yes, it's going to be even higher than that, right? It's
Quick question. In Austria, is there also such a thing as Wohngeld? You know, that you get
housing
also,
subsidy.
you get that? I mean, is that for certain incomes that they get, you know, 300, 200 euros? But they have to be in a rental arrangement. In Germany, they have rental and then they get subsidy for the rent to offset some of this. Uh, and it's not based on income, so anybody can like get it, as far as I know, unless I'm wrong. But does that exist in Austria? That they people get, you know, if they're in public housing, they also can get an additional subsidy for being renters. Or won't get it? No?
Yeah, I'm not familiar with
Okay.
that program,
Okay. No. Okay.
but there are probably ways. I mean, if
Okay.
you're on welfare,
Yeah. Then you get it.
where I mean, there's a cumbersome procedure. I think you can
Yeah.
apply for housing subsidies.
Okay. That's for the
Um,
unemployed, I think.
yeah, yeah. So there's a specific
Yeah.
program for those, but then otherwise, I mean, like I say, if you're like a middle class working person, I mean, you could get a really sweet deal effectively by paying the regular rent, right? So because
Mhm.
again, if you're paying, let's say, 400 euros, right, and let's say you're like a civil servant, so your take home might be, I don't know,
2,000 euros?
more than 3,000 euros, let's say.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, actually, that's a pretty sweet arrangement.
Yeah.
It's like that makes housing expenses, relatively cheap, right?
Yeah.
And
But yeah.
and
Yeah.
that's a way how you could limit rent price increases, right?
The only criticism I sometimes hear from my relatives over in Germany at least is when you reach the 59,000 euro income range, you will get up to 38% tax, I think, or 40% tax. Once you reach that threshold of 59,000 euros, I don't know how it is in Austria, but everything below that, you still pay, you know, 25% income tax. It goes lower the lower you make. It goes down to maybe 15%, you know. But I'm curious if that's the same thing in Austria. If you reach that $60,000 euro threshold, is it almost like 40% of income tax? Is that true or no? We'll
Um,
have to double
I mean,
check.
I don't have all
Okay.
the tax brackets in my head, but there is.
I'll try to locate it. That's the
But
only criticism I get from my relatives. They're always like, "Oh, you guys have lower taxes. We pay 40%."
but that's true. Yeah. So if you
Yeah,
do like the total
yeah,
tax, I mean, so like both the US and then the German and the Austrian systems, I
Mhm.
mean, they have a progressive income tax structure, which means that
Yeah, and
uh,
VAT tax too, right?
yeah, so the progressive income tax, basically you have the tax brackets.
Hmm.
So within each tax bracket, so within each income level, you apply a certain tax rate to that income, right, level. And so the calculations can be quite complex. But if you look at the total tax take, which is of course the one that counts, right? Basically, what percentage of your total income is taxable or taxed, then it is higher in the European countries for sure.
Mm,
So I would say probably like in Austria, it would probably be like half your income is probably
yeah. But
taxed.
people say there's a trade-off that you get more, public transportation, you get more security, social benefits, and because you have a higher taxes,
That's right.
yeah,
That's the main thing. So
yeah,
in Austria, I mean, you could have a very low nominal income, and you would be okay because I mean, the main expense that you have to think about is for the transportation, it would be the uh, like the metro card, I suppose
hmm.
you can call it that.
What's that, like a 100 euros a month or 60 euros, 70
No,
euros?
so they have like the 365 a year basically.
Oh,
So it's
wow.
basically €1 a day.
Yeah.
And so you will purchase that 365 ticket basically, and you have it valid for an entire year, right?
Oh, that's
Um,
interesting.
and then the food will probably be the main expense, and of course rent. But
Yeah.
again, if you're able to get into the public housing, where there's like
Mm,
some qualification process, but if you do get into that, then the rents are going to be fairly stable. The thing that screwed the people recently was because of the Ukraine war. You saw
yeah.
the
Perfect.
energy prices
Yeah, energy,
increasing.
right. Mm,
So that seems to me to be a major disadvantage for the European countries, especially those that are not energy self-sufficient. So like Germany and Austria definitely belong to those countries. That's where, yeah, the energy prices really screwed them over.
yeah.
But otherwise, you could subsist on low nominal incomes. The health insurance is not an issue at all, because if you work, then you're going to be part of the public insurance.
Yeah.
You go to the doctor; it doesn't cost anything. Um, and but so I mean, not everything is like rosy right now um uh, because if you have private insurance, like if you purchase additional private health insurance, um, or if you um, pay for the doctor's services with basically out of pocket, like with your own fees, it's true that you will get seen earlier
Oh.
for certain medical treatments. So there is they call it like a two-class medicine kind of
Hmm.
and those issues. I mean, I think they become more acute, especially as the population is aging rapidly, right? So you have naturally increase in like demand for healthcare services.
Mm,
And you have to consider, I mean, I mean, the same problem in the US actually. So many doctors are baby boomers, right, themselves.
mm.
So, you
Is
know,
there a shortage of staff also in Austria, for medical staff, elderly home staff? Does they have a problem in filling the jobs?
yeah, it's becoming more and more acute as the years go by.
Mhm.
And you know, they have to increase the cap of like medical students, right? They're trying to train more students, but you know, ultimately, I mean, there's only so many
Yeah.
um, you know, recruits that they can find, right? So and it's more acute in the countryside. So I think if you're in Vienna, I think you're probably going to be fine, living there. But yeah, if you are from the countryside, you're going to have access issues with doctors for sure. It might take you time to, look for new doctors. When I was there, I was reading an article about like I think like in Tyrol and Vorarlberg, right,
Mhm.
the western provinces, where I think they only have a handful of abortion clinics actually.
Mm,
And abortion for some reason, I mean, it becomes a hot political topic again. But one of the major issues is not so much about legislation, right? About like restricting uh, abortion access legislatively, but rather that you just don't have enough doctors that provide this kind of service.
mm,
So, um, and then you're going to have an issue. So if you're like a lower income person, you require abortion services, you would probably have to travel to the big city,
mm,
in order to obtain it. And
mm,
and you have the same kinds of inconveniences that you would have. Let's say, I mean, if you're like a Texas woman, right, you have to might have to go to like
mhm.
as far as Virginia, maybe, or
Or New Mexico or
New Mexico
Colorado.
would be Colorado, yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, the same thing. I mean, if de facto, I mean, because the rural healthcare is so insufficient, you'd have to go into the big population centers to obtain these services.
Mm.
Yeah,
That's
it's an
crazy.
inconvenience.
Yeah,
Um,
very crazy. Yeah.
but at least with the abortion services, I saw the numbers in the Economist magazine, and they were saying that the total number of abortions carried out in the U.S. Has actually increased since the Dobbs v. Jackson ruling.
Yeah.
Um,
Unintended consequence, right?
yeah, and the
Burden would
main
say.
well, the main reason for that is that um, um, well, first of all, you have the women traveling, so that's
Hmm.
issue we just discussed across the state lines. And then the other thing is that you have um, like telemedicine, right? And also um, the abortion pills that are being
Yeah.
sent. And it would be done across state lines, right? So like the pro-abortion states, they have passed legislation to basically shield the uh, abortion providers in their own state from criminal liability for sending the abortion pills via mail.
Hmm.
And in that way, I mean, yes, I mean, I think you could probably uh, keep the abortion rate high enough. We also see an increase in vasectomies and yeah, sterilization. Um, you know, w- which tells you that, I mean, on the margins, right? You call it like unintended consequences. I mean, those
Hmm.
exist, right?
Yeah.
There are some people who are saying, well, if I can't have that abortion, but I don't want to become pregnant, then like
Yeah.
people are going to be creative, right?
Yeah.
Uh,
With
on
yeah,
on this issue.
with medical risks is yeah, linked and problems, definitely. I'm with you there. Yeah, big topic.
Yeah.
Big topic.
And yeah, so healthcare, I mean, it is one of the most, complex issues. I mean, because I mean, you have again aging of the population, and as we brought out in the earlier podcasts, I mean, the poor metabolic health. I mean, this to me is
Food, yeah, food.
it's kind of the biggest, you know, the disasters that's been happening in this country. I just saw this graphics on Twitter. It was about the largest employers in the U.S. states, and oftentimes, I mean, it's either Walmart, right, or it is some kind of like medical system, right? So
Mm,
in the state of Maryland, I mean, we have Johns Hopkins University,
mm,
which is one of the biggest universities, also in terms of like research dollars. Um, mainly because of the medical system, right? A lot of the medical care that we have in this region is supplied through the Johns Hopkins system. So yeah, you have um, basically, yeah, like universities that are tied to the hospital chains.
yeah,
Um, and then of course you have like, I mean, in states like I think it was in Connecticut, where you have that's where like the big health insurance companies are located. And they're also a major source of employment. So it's
mm,
basically, yeah, like kind of like the food retail business, plus the healthcare, you know, slash university systems. But oftentimes university systems that are attached to the hospital systems, right? And those become the biggest employers.
yeah,
Um, and and then you ask yourself, well, is that the best use
mm,
of the national resources?
yeah.
Because because the thing is that, I mean, if many of these big food retailers, you know, with these big food companies, if they're selling us, um, foods that basically trigger diseases, right? Insulin resistance, type 2 diabetes, obesity, etc. Um, and then as a result of that, food making us sick, then we go seek for medical treatment, right? I mean, this is like medical treatment that would have been avoidable. I mean, certain, cancers or chronic diseases
Because of the food that
that,
was
yeah, the food that we
processed.
were consuming. That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, and so you ask yourself, well, I mean, is that the best use of resources? I mean, we are in fact doing it. I mean, we are in fact consuming more and more, devoting more and more of the national resources um, towards causing metabolic disease and treating it.
At the same time, which is two contradictions, the cause and the treatment. Yeah,
Yeah.
huge expenditures. Yeah,
Well,
yeah,
and it's a death spiral because, if your population gets sicker and sicker, I
yeah.
mean,
I,
we
I
don't function.
wonder on another level. Think of stocks. That are traded in the millions. Coca-Cola stock or McDonald's stock, and then you have stock in healthcare companies. There's lots of money that it gets traded via stocks. So there's another aspect, that we think of companies and the state subsidizing these companies. But on the other hand, there's also this financialization and stocks traded, like I said, Coca-Cola stock or McDonald's stock, and there's dividends, there's shareholders, and it's always fixated towards profit, it's a profit idea. And so then they may try to, reduce the cost, and unintentionally then they use these ingredients that are toxic, deadly, and harmful for health, so it's a bizarre reality, if you think about it. That's also, these are traded stocks. I mean, you can see it. Any person can look at the stocks that they go up or down. Food stocks, cereal companies, the soda companies, right? Uh, so for me, it's always interesting. I look at the stocks, see what those are, the brands that people buy in the stores. It reflects also the consumer behavior, right?
Yeah, because what they
Yeah.
know is that, these food companies, they know that the substances that they're putting into the food are addictive, right?
Mhm.
So, because, they would do these physiological tests, right? With, if they add these kinds of, food items, um, what is the physiological response, right? They would test like how fast am I eating those cereals, right? Like how much sugar do I have to add into the cereal to increase the speed of consumption. Um, and and can I ensure that, like, let's say if you open up a bag of chips, and usually it doesn't happen that you say, okay, I'm going to eat like 3 or 4 pieces of chips. I mean, oftentimes you open the package, like a big packet, and then you don't stop until you finish the whole packet, right?
Hmm.
And that's just the I mean, because the kinds of ingredients that are input into the ultra processed food is going to make it such that you will consume it at a rapid clip.
Hmm.
And those ultra processed foods, they are messing with your satiety hormones,
Hmm.
um, which I think it's called leptin. I'm not sure exactly, but there's was one satiety hormone that would be naturally triggered if you eat whole foods, right? So if you eat meat and vegetables and eggs and things like that, at some point you're gonna have the satiety hormone that's being triggered, and you'll stop eating, and you'll feel pretty full for many hours, and so you stop the snacking. Um, with the ultra processed food, it's I mean, hormonally, it's not possible actually for you to stop. Um, it doesn't have the ingredients in the whole form with all the nutrients that your body needs. And and then so therefore, I mean, so if you do not get filled up by the food that you're consuming, um, then then the hunger hormone is going to be active, right?
Hmm.
Like your hunger hormone is going to be active basically until you feed it something that will be filling actually. So Um, and yeah, so but ultimately, I mean, the whole point of it is simply to say that people have to be educated regarding the good food, and they should avoid
Yeah.
the bad ultra processed ones.
So
Uh,
it's also the stuff that's put into the food that's making us addicted. Is that like what you're trying to get at? And it's
the
causing imbalances when our hormones, and we become even more addictive, that we have to eat it faster, and it our bodies become trained to consume this fast food junk, or whatever we're eating.
or the processed food, yeah. So
Yeah,
as
that's
I
what
was,
you're trying to say, right? Or,
yeah,
well, how I understand it. Yeah.
yes, I just finished a book by Chris Van Tulleken. He's a British medical doctor, and but he's also a BBC reporter. He did a bunch of documentaries on this topic, and for one news report, he went to Manaus, which is in northern Brazil.
Mhm.
I think along the Amazon River, and they went from uh, close to zero obesity to I think like half the population or so being obese, and diabetic, pre-diabetic. And basically, the thing that changed in their food culture is that Nestle, which is one of these like big food corporations that
Yeah.
sell sugary products, they basically they have this boat that goes along the river, and it's kind of like a supermarket boat.
Hmm.
So they literally they pull up in these villages and settlements along the river, and they would be stocked with with the products like the ultra processed food that that Nestle sells.
Yeah.
And then it turns out that the most popular product that they carry is Kit Kat. which is
Kit
like
Kat, candy
the
bar.
chocolate, yeah, the candy bar.
Yeah.
So they always make sure that when they refill the boat, that they always
Yeah.
restock the Kit Kats. Um, yeah, and so basically within a couple of years, um, the metabolic health of these, I suppose, I mean, I suppose you can call them like the indigenous communities in that
Yeah.
area. The metabolic health has been destroyed effectively.
Obesity. Yeah.
And then those kids are addicted to these kinds of you know so-called foods, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, so it's like, well, how do you turn the ship around? Basically, I mean, um, I think that, well, so obviously, I mean, at the government level policy, I mean, some things have to be done to shift the subsidization programs, right? So you would have to stop the subsidies of, like, wheat and corn,
Hmm.
right? Except maybe the one that you feed to, like, the herd animals. Um, so that's why, like, ruminant meats are generally very good, actually. So if you have, like, access to, like, bisons, or like usually cows, right, beef, and lamb, sheep, things like that. Um, because with cows, I mean, let's say if you feed the cows with, like, corn and grass and things like that, um, the cow has like four stomachs, right?
Mm.
And so it's going to be able to filter all of the, you know, toxins that might be contained in, let's say, I mean, a lot of the corn that we grow, right? They're added with these toxins and chemicals so that they, so that the wheat dies out and stuff. And yeah, and then oftentimes, I mean, it's going to be entered into our food supply directly. Now, however, if it is entered to the food supply indirectly, right? Let's say you feed it to the cows. The cow filters it through its stomach. And then, when the cow is ready to be slaughtered for and then processed for consumption, um, you know, you're gonna have, highly nutrient dense food. Contains all of the vitamins and the minerals that your body needs, the proteins and the fats, right? Um, and it will have a minimal amount of toxins,
Mm.
right? So I mean, if you consider, I mean, like, chicken, pork has one stomach similar to humans, so they're not going to be able to filter as much of the toxins that they're ingesting in their food supply, right? Um, and then fish, right? So, like, the nutritionists, the mainstream nutritionists, are saying that the best way for you to get your the proteins and the omega 3s that your
Fish.
body
Yeah.
needs to function, well, you should get it from the fish, right? They're saying the fish is
Salmon, right?
salmon is
So,
good, and I mean,
yeah.
so I consume, quite a lot of fish too, but I'm just saying that, you know,
Hmm.
in terms of, like, environmental toxins, I would say that fish are the most exposed.
In the ocean, right? Yeah.
Yeah, right. Because if you're in the water, you're going to be, however many toxins you have in the ocean water.
Yeah.
That's however many microplastics that you have, because we dumped it into the ocean, right?
Hmm.
Um, all of
Nuclear
that,
waste.
yeah. I mean, it's going to be contained in the tissue of those fish.
Uh,
So then you catch the fish, and the fish. I mean, it's such a tiny organism, right? I don't think that they have a lot of filtering options, right?
mhm.
And so whatever toxins you have in the ocean enters the fish. Then we catch the fish enters our food supply, and yeah. So I mean, like sardines that contain mercury. Um, Now if you eat it from time to time, I think it's probably okay. I mean, probably the quantities are too low to be toxic, but for people that regularly consume sardines, I mean, they would have to worry about like how much mercury is there, right? I mean, and does it result in nerve
Yeah.
damage or something like that?
What about things like spam? What do you think about spam? The pork, in a metal thing, spam,
Yeah, I
processed
would say
spam.
it's not ideal as a food source, but I would say that I was listening to this, podcast with Ken Berry, and so he's one of these like health guru doctors, and his take is that it's better to eat like ultra processed meat.
Mhm,
Um, like I mean, there's more innocuous versions. I mean, if you think of like bacon, which I consume regularly,
mhm,
then like sausages, like pork, beef, chicken sausages.
mhm,
Um, you know, those are fine. Like deli meats, right? Like
mhm.
I like the speck, the Italian speck, right?
Oh wow, good stuff.
Yeah. I also like what do they have? Like the versions of like ham, the prosciutto, right?
Mm.
So those I think are, I mean, in terms of the processed meats, I would say those are the better choices. But even if you consume spam, or if you consume, bologna's, right,
Oh,
bologna
those are
meat,
horrible. Pork,
um,
chicken, beef. They just grind it all together.
um,
I
yeah, but
think.
yeah, so it's not ideal meat, but I think it's,
Okay,
uh, yeah, it's not ideal meat, but it is better than 99% of all of the processed foods that you're going to be finding in the supermarket shelves. So most of the, you know, like think of these like foods that had been sold to us as health foods. Like think of like granola bars, right?
mhm. Well,
Or think of like like cereals or even oatmeal.
uh,
Steel cut oatmeals. They were way worse for your health
isn't it some
than spam.
orange juice is also because they put a lot of sugar in it and they process it again. Orange juices that you buy perishable.
Yeah,
That are also
orange juice is going to
uh,
be just as bad for you as
like
Coca-Cola, or Pepsi, or any
uh,
of these other soft drinks.
uh,
Um, because so the thing that's going to make you metabolically sick. So yeah, if you have an excess amount of glucose, but notice, I mean, for fruit sugar, I
mhm,
mean, fruit sugar has its own name, right? It's called fructose, right? I mean, fructose is a more potent version of sugar, right? As
mhm,
compared to the glucose. Um, and so if you consume orange juice or any kind of fruit juice, including like apple juice and like these multivitamin juices with multiple fruits in it, or even like fruit smoothies, which I think is also um, unhealthy, I would say, because
yeah.
uh, because essentially, I mean, so you have the natural fruit that's the best thing to consume because it contains some amount of sugar, right? The fructose. But the fructose is tied in a web of fiber, right? Because every whole fruit, I mean, if you pick up an apple or if you pick up like a banana or something like that, it is because it's tied up in a solid material, which is the fiber.
Mhm,
Now, if you consume fiber with the sugar together as a whole fruit, um, whatever sugar is contained in the fruit is going to be absorbed slowly into the body. And the slow absorption is what you want because you don't want the spike in the sugar into the bloodstream, right?
mhm,
That's the thing that causes insulin resistance and type 2 diabetes, obesity, and all these other problems. So eating the whole fruit is going to be okay. Um, But if you drink the fruit juice, if you drink the smoothie, you're just going to overload on the sugar. The fiber is going to be stripped off because notice you only have the juice, right? You have basically, I mean, the water that let's say is contained in the orange, because water is mostly, sorry, the orange
Mhm.
mostly is like water in the chemical consistency, um, with the with the sugar basically. So it's just sugar water without any fiber because you strip the
Crazy.
fiber out, right, when you squeezed the
Yeah.
orange.
It's almost like ice cream.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And
Might as
and
well eat ice cream.
you might as well eat ice cream. This might be even it's like less bad depending on how much sugar you input there. But
Yeah.
at least like with table sugar, I mean, you have the glucose molecule, which is less potent than the fructose. But again, it's not something that is good, right? I mean, something that's less bad is not good, right? So um,
Agreed.
the thing that helps people who have issues with controlling blood sugar is actually the sequencing of the meals, right?
Mhm.
So the biggest mistake that you can make is let's say if you see like a piece of cookie or cake or whatever, things that you know is going to spike your blood sugar. Um, the secret is to not eat that piece of cake by itself, right? What you want to do is you want to consume it as a dessert to the main dish. So because let's say if you eat, let's say, fibrous vegetables and the proteins, right, like meat or eggs or something like that. Um, so then um, you create kind of like a filter, right? And then
Mhm.
if you eat the cake as a dessert, then the blood sugar spike is going to be less. So just think of like the sequencing of the food, right?
Mhm.
Can oftentimes reduce the blood sugar spikes, and that's a way how you can I suppose maintain uh you know
I wonder
good
if we could
metabolic health.
also, you know, think of it as a social class, reality of people with certain income, and affordability problem. I mean, if what I see generally, I mean, if you go to a grocery store in an upper class or middle class community, you will have produce section, you will have organic food section, you will have, variety of food options. But like if you go to a low income community, maybe it's a dollar store or a small gas station, has a little grocery section. They don't have produce sections and everything is processed. So I wonder, if we look at it through a social class dimension, we have a kind of, I don't want to use a word, gentrification of food, like we're able to purchase and what is available to us if it matches our income, you know. Even food pantries, in my communities, there's more and more food pantries. They often don't have the capability to offer perishable, so they have everything in can, so if you are dependent on food pantries, you want to have a diet, you just got what's in the can, or you have ramen noodles, uh,
Right. Yeah.
but
So
but some food pantries are trying to offer perishable and produce, but it's expensive to keep it cooled in hot climates, but I thought about this more and more. I mean, are we, blaming the victim for their choices? Yeah, of course, sometimes people make bad choices, or we should try to also think about, like you said, our food system. And there's companies and they want to make a profit, right? And income plays a role. People either spend a lot of their money on rent nowadays, or they have to spend it on food or gas, right? Uh,
yeah.
but I don't
So
know. Yeah, maybe in Europe they have this at least an ability, even if you're poor, you can still have a lot of food choices, you know? Even I don't know. There's some Aldi stores, they try to at least offer some apples, not like a whole food store where you have like 10 different variety apples and organic and non-organic, but if I go to a gas station, for instance, of course you're not going to see any produce, but dollar stores, you don't see any produce either. Nothing and perishables really expensive there, high priced, right? So I
Yeah,
guess I don't know if I opened up a can of worms, but this social class component.
yeah. I mean, food deserts are very, very serious. I mean, so in Baltimore, I mean, the way how I mean, a colleague of mine, uh, he lives down in Annapolis, so it's about an hour drive from our campus, and so he would always drive by the center of the town in Baltimore, and and he notices that like in his drive, I mean, he doesn't see a lot of grocery stores, actually. So, but if you drive, let's say, so my campus is kind of like northeast of northeast Baltimore, and then you drive south in the direction of this city, right? So if you drive towards the center, yeah, you're not going to find a lot of fresh grocery stores. If you drive in the northern direction, this is where I live, more in the
Mhm.
suburbs direction. We probably have like 1 dozen supermarkets in, probably within 10-minute driving distance from where I live, right? And over here, I mean, I can even walk to the supermarket, right?
Oh wow.
And so there are serious socioeconomic gradients regarding food access, and food deserts are a very serious concern. And if you are on a path of survival, then yes, you're gonna eat the pasta with a tomato sauce that they offer, right?
Hmm.
Um, but still, nonetheless, I mean, you shouldn't have an illusion regarding what is good food, what is bad food. If you can, um, get a discount on, I don't know, bulk buying of like eggs, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Or if you can buy ground beef. Even sometimes like when I go to the supermarket, they have this one section where um, I think it's like 10 beef burger patties for $10.
Hmm.
Which is it's a pretty good deal actually. I mean, you maybe eat 5 burger patties a day or something. So, okay, you have 2 days of, solid nutrition, I would say.
Hmm.
And people are saying, well, like, the beef burger patties, that's what's going to give you diabetes. It's going to make you fat. And it's like, well, the problem with that logic is that,
Hmm.
you know, yes, it is true that people who are eating things with the burger meat, they are getting sick, but that's because the burger meat comes with other things, right? So,
Yeah.
if you order the burger, so it will always come with the fries and with the soda, that's definitely unhealthy.
Yeah. Very, very
Um, it will come with the burger bun, right?
carbs,
So,
carbs, right?
that's right. This is the carbohydrates, pure
Hmm.
sugar, is converted into sugar. Um, and and then also you have like the ketchup, which of course is laden with high fructose corn syrup. And various like sauces, where the barbecue sauce is also spiked with sugar. So uh, like the dietary advice that I've got, like let's say if you go, so if you really don't like cooking, right? Um, you could go to a McDonald's or Burger King, and you could say, I just ordered the beef patties, and maybe
Hmm.
give me some, whatever lettuce with tomatoes and onions or whatever.
That's the way to do it.
Um, and if you did that, and you, let's say, if you only lived off of basically, I mean, think of like a burger menu minus the soda, the fries, and the burger bun and the sauces, right? You
Hmm.
strip those things out, and if you lived only on the burger patties and the salads, I mean, you could eat it every day of your life, I mean, there's of course issues. There's going to be issues with the variety,
Right.
but you could eat it every day of your life, and you're going to be in top health, at least metabolic health.
Okay.
Um, and,
Assuming you do exercise and, balanced diet and
well, I mean,
movement. Yeah.
even in that case, I mean, like I mean, you don't have to do that much exercise. I mean, especially like if you, um, so if you already are overweight or obese, it might be difficult to do strenuous exercise because your joints are already overtaxed with the weight that you
Mhm.
carry. And you get tired easily, and then things hurt very quickly. So actually, you know, in that case, you have to fix the diet first, and then naturally, as long as you eat like low insulin triggering foods, basically low carb foods, um, basically whole foods, not processed, you're gonna be losing weight naturally. And then at some point you will have lost so much weight.
Mhm.
Uh, Now, if you take a long walk, or if you go jogging, or if you go bicycling, or if you do
Better
strenuous
endurance.
exercises, you notice that you have number one, you have more energy to do it. Number two, it's not going to hurt as much, so it's not going to overtax your joints.
Mhm.
Um, and yeah, you're just going to feel more vigorous. You'll be able to do it.
Longer life expectancy too, probably.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, so I mean, the main study is I think about like with exercise is that if you're able to, especially muscle mass actually being even more important than being able to do the cardio. Though doing cardio is also very beneficial. But generally, like if, for instance, if you're able to do 50 push-ups a day,
Mhm.
you will, you know, you will have lower all-cause mortality than if you were able to do, let's say, less than 10 push-ups a day. Um, and so, yeah, so just
Yeah.
weight-bearing exercises are very important. Um, but again, one step at a time. I mean, if you are in a position where you know, like you can't physically do it because you might have too much weight on yourself, then you have to hold off on you know muscle exercises.
Speaking of health and food, I wanted to maybe go in a different direction. This goes to my mentor, Adrian Tan, who wrote a book a few years ago. He's a sociologist, senior lecturer at UNT Dallas, and Million Dollar Muscle. And he focuses on sports in the United States. A couple of weeks ago, I don't know if you know the news, Larry Allen died at age of 50. He was a really famous Dallas Cowboys offensive lineman. Troy Aikman even had an announcement of this, and but it really wasn't a discussion in the news. I mean, he was only made it to 50 years of age as an NFL football player, and it's tragic, that many professional players sometimes. I mean, it could be a variety of things. Of course, we know offensive linemen usually are heavier than different players. Their position is very stressful, and he was considered overweight for much of his life. Um, so when you think about sports in the US and sports being such a big thing, professional sports, high school sports, not just football. Football is one example, but there's also basketball, weightlifting and track. And do you think that there's also a risk, especially for youth or younger people that want to really achieve, success in sports, especially if they're in a high school level and they are doing damage to their bodies early, like with the supplements they take or the horrible stress they put on their bodies to puff themselves up, you know. Again, imagine like if you are trying to play football like Larry Allen. I don't know if you know Larry Allen, the
No,
the
never heard of
pitching.
it.
No, he was very large offensive lineman. He was very famous, but physical, very physical. But people talk about this excessive stress, expectations in sports, and since sports is such a big thing, you know, in the US, it's a cultural script, right? You see it in weekends, Sunday football, Monday night football. But I'm curious, we never look at it that way. And also the sport and the hyper athletics kind of thing. I mean, and athletes, you know, there's a lot of athletes that make it try to make a career out of it, but they also end up doing damage to their bodies in the process. And then it, you know, and then later this is a consequence. They die earlier or have medical problems, right? You know, the movie that came out a few years ago with the brain injuries for hitting the helmets was based on a true story. I can't remember the name of it, but it was focusing on the when in football, this is everything is physical, right? They hit their heads, and then there's damage to the brain, skull, things like this over time accumulates, and it can often turn into a disease, you know. So I don't know. That's another dimension. I really, maybe I don't know what you have to say about that, or have any words, or how does this tie into also the food, you know, industrial complex, but also the sports industries, you know, and
So in sports,
uh,
like I mean, if you have, so you're referring to a player who was obese or had some other metabolic health issues
well, it's the
while
position that
playing.
the in the NFL, particular positions, particularly the offensive linemen and also the defensive linemen, they are puffed up. They are very physical because of the nature of those positions. And at years of playing college ball and then in NFL, those accumulate into risks, health risks. So they have shorter lives, just like boxers. Boxers, you know,
And
have
is the health risk, I mean, is that related to what they eat or is
yeah.
that
Common, it's
related
both.
to
It's
the
both.
injuries?
It's food. It's also the nature of the working out and how they, you know, work out sometimes under strenuous conditions, but also the supplements that they take or they did take. You know, steroids use was a problem in the 90s and 2000s. Uh, but yeah, it's an interesting intersection between food, health, sports, you know, and yeah, it's the way I see it. I think it's be because you have these, it's not just the food, you know, of course, but proportion to what you do to your body, you know, over time. Let's say a lot of physical strain. If you're trying to have strength, which often these players, you know, they have to go through ridiculous training. We call it two-a-days. I was a high school football player. And these things accumulate over, you know, years, and then they end up in the NFL, and they often have, you know, short careers. They, of course, they make a lot of money, but that's why increasingly you have some professional players that quit because of this excess physical stress and also medical risk that they get concussions or they have medical problems, you know, because of all these years of playing at that level, right? So
Yeah,
it's
so
a, go ahead.
so if you have like sports injuries, right? So you mentioned like the concussion, the brain concussion is a
Mhm.
major issue because the human brain is um very sensitive, right? I mean, it's not something that you can shake as easily like, you know, broken bones on your arms or your legs, right? Um, you know, you could sometimes have permanent damage that you know, impairs um your mental functions basically, right? So that is, I think, a different kind of worms where I would say that
Mm,
The only antidote to that would be to not play these kinds of sports.
right.
But I do know because I play recreationally soccer, and sometimes you get a ball to the head, right? You have to do a
Yeah,
header,
yeah.
right? Or sometimes you have other players that don't look out, so then they step on your feet, right? And so yeah, there's some risk to injury that you're gonna have if you play the sport. Now, oftentimes, we still keep playing the sport because we love the adrenaline, the dopamine that gets released because while we're playing the game, while we're winning the game and stuff.
Status, right?
Yeah, so we
Mm,
like playing it for a reason, and we take the risk of injury as a kind of a cost to be paid, right?
mm,
Um,
yeah.
but I mean, in the case where it's like, well, what if um, you know, you live an unhealthy lifestyle? I mean, I was
Hmm.
reading the obituary of this one American who migrated to Japan, became a sumo ringer,
Hmm.
um, and passed away recently. And I think it was in his late 50s or so, maybe early 60s.
Yeah,
It was
that's definitely not long. Yeah.
yeah, not a very high age. And then I was reading up on it, and so the sumo ringers they're these like huge figures, I guess, and they're like wrestling each other to the ground, right? Or they try to, so they're inside of a circle and they try to push the other sumo ringer out of that circle, right? That's the whole point of the sumo ringers. And the diets that they're consuming, actually, I mean, it's interesting. They're not eating unhealthy food necessarily. Um,
But they're heavy, right?
yeah, but they eat in huge quantities. I mean, I guess the unhealthiest part is the rice. Like,
Okay.
part of the Japanese cuisine is the white rice, which actually is pure sugar,
Mm,
because it converts into sugar. Now, most Japanese are not going to be obese because the quantity of rice that they're eating is going to be quite small, actually. I mean, even if you look at the sushi, right? Like, it's
mm.
like they've basically like one biters with the rice, right? Um, so generally, I mean, if you eat quantity that's probably low enough, I think you're probably going to be okay. Now, the thing with the sumo ringers is that they eat a huge quantity of everything, right? So they eat
Mm.
a lot of rice, a lot of proteins, a lot of vegetables, and then that's how they get really big.
So
And then
I don't mean to interrupt you. They make themselves fat though, right? They have to make themselves huge so they
yes,
can
yes,
advantage in the sport.
yeah. So and then oftentimes, so they live up until the 50s and 60s, and the common cause of death is heart attack, right?
Mm,
Which is not surprising because your heart is going to be the first organ that will probably give up if you overtax it, right? So
yeah.
if you have an obese body, I mean, there's going to be just much more work that your heart has to do. I mean, your heart is ultimately a muscle, and then the more fat cells, like inflated fat cells you have, the more vasoconstriction you're going to get, and then your heart has to just pump a lot harder to
Hmm.
supply all of the cells with oxygen, right, with blood, and so it's superbly
They,
taxing, right? And that's why I mean, in most cases, with obesity related deaths are oftentimes connected to cardiovascular disease.
yeah,
And
definitely.
yeah, and this I mean serious issue now. I mean, now in the Japanese case, I mean, I don't know how serious it is because most people are not going to be sumo ringers, right? Um, most people are going to you know the
Yeah.
eat an ordinary diet. Um, I mean, the way how like so I used to have so I was never in Japan, but I had this Japanese supermarket in Princeton when I lived there, and you could and they would sell like these typical Japanese lunches, which are like kind of like a bento box, which is basically like some rice with um usually like cucumbers and like like seaweed salad,
Hmm.
and then usually one protein, like eel or salmon or chicken or something like that.
Lots of wasabi sauce, right? Wasabi.
And it has got the wasabi and
Yeah, good
yeah.
stuff.
Um, yeah. So and um and, and even that plate, the bento box. I mean, it wasn't like huge, right?
Mm.
I mean, you could say it was one portion, yeah, but oftentimes, I mean, like when I knew that, like if I took the bento box for the lunch, I would get something second, right? Yeah, I usually get like the bento box plus like the sushi, right?
Oh, wow.
Like 8 pieces of sushi, and then I'd be like, okay, that's probably going to be enough for a meal.
Mm.
But I would think like it's not enough to just have the bento box by itself, right? Um, and that's how that's how I think that's the Japanese approach, right? Which is, I mean, for
Smaller
the average
meals.
Japanese person, they would take that small bento box,
Mm.
and that would be the whole meal, right?
So smaller meals and smaller increments.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mhm.
And now, but it's a big question. I mean, whether it will work for people or not. You know, generally you should be aware that, like, you should only consume meals if if you are hungry, right? If you're not hungry, you should not be
Mhm.
eating. That's generally the best health advice. But then also, you notice, like, again, if you eat ultra processed food, it's going to be very hard to stop eating, because um, you're getting calories, but they're not nutrient dense, right?
Yeah.
So
Horrible. Yeah.
yeah, so if it's not nutrient dense, then your body's going to give you a signal to keep eating. And it's want to keep eating. Your body will keep want to eat until you give it something that is satiating.
Yeah.
Um,
That's how
uh,
people become addicted, huh?
that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So just load up on meat and eggs, and especially like in the mornings. I think that's really the most important meal, I would say. So,
But
um,
but Larry, poor people can't afford meat and eggs anymore. I'm just saying, I mean, this is from a adjunct perspective, you know.
yeah.
I
Well,
could do sushi. I could do sushi once a month, but I couldn't afford it every day of the week, you know. It's probably pricey, you know. Even some of the grocery stores will have the little packs of sushi, which are reasonable. I think it's like $10 range, but the meat, unless people buy chicken, yeah, the beef gets fairly expensive.
but again, I
Inflation,
brought
yeah.
up the example of the beef patties, right?
Okay.
Uh,
Okay. Okay,
like
that's fair.
just look for it in the supermarket. I don't know whether you have it down in Texas, but like
Oh,
if you
trust
have
me, we
these
got plenty of
deals,
those. We got plenty of those.
yeah, just like a
Uh,
beef patties, $10 for 10 pieces. And I'm like, that's a really good deal. I mean,
yeah.
or if you have ground beef, generally go for the higher fat ones, because again, it's going to be more satiating. So
Mm,
you have like I think it's 80/20, 20%
yeah,
fat.
that's usually good.
Um, yeah,
Yeah,
so try to
quality.
get those, and yeah, and if you feed yourself that, and it's like,
Feels good, yeah.
and then you will, and then it just and then you don't have to eat anything for
Yeah.
several hours, right?
Yeah. Feels good, yeah.
And yeah, so it's just, yeah, being, I mean, I think food education is important, but I think also, as you mentioned, the food deserts, I think that issue has to
Yeah,
be
there's
addressed. Um,
I kind of, you know, maybe I'm too pessimistic. I do think there's this agency, individual choice dynamic, but I also think that there are structural issues, you know, that some things may be determined. Um, but I think some individual choice and people selecting. But again, the price, you know, the cost. I think maybe we live in a society where cost benefit analysis, people are consumers and they make decisions right on the spot when they're in a grocery store. and they may not realize. I mean, I look at the nutrient facts and I look at the sodium content, and things like that. But I wonder about people who are in a rush and they don't have the excess money. They unfortunately then are, forced to purchase some of these highly concentrated foods,
Yeah,
as in just to make it through the week.
yeah. So I think sodium content, I think that has to be re-examined because I remember I went to this nutritionist and I was
Yeah.
diagnosed with high blood pressure, and they said we have to go low on the sodium. And there were many months, over a year, where I was very low sodium diet, but it did
Mm.
not change
Oh, really?
the blood pressure at all. It didn't change it much at all. And then when I reduced the carbohydrates, then it started to drop, right?
Ah,
And so
okay.
and so it's essentially, I mean, so it seems like sodium itself, um, it is correlated with high blood pressure, but it's not the cause actually. So the because there's something that is causing the sodium to be retained in your body, right?
Hmm.
And that's going to be the sugar and the carbohydrates. So if you go low carb,
Yeah.
then what happens is that the amount of sodium that's going to be retained is going to be less.
Hmm.
So in the case where you low carb, you actually have to go a little bit higher on the sodium after that. So you have to salt your food properly. And then also, and then a great side effect is that your food will taste better, right? So if you
Oh, yeah.
put a decent amount of salt, it will taste better. And again, keep the carbs low, and you will feel great. I mean, the food will taste great. Your blood pressure is going to be normal. And you will feel really good about it.
Mm.
And actually, like, you notice that dehydration. I mean, oftentimes, I mean, it doesn't just mean like lack of water, like H2O. It's also about the electrolytes, right? So you have
Yeah.
sodium, potassium, magnesium, and was it calcium, right? I
Yeah.
think there's four of these electrolytes that you need to have to function. Um, so yeah, I mean, again, with nutrient dense foods like in the vegetables and especially in the meats,
Blueberries.
it's going to be, it's going to
Blueberries are good.
contain those electrolytes. Um, and yeah, and just salt your food to taste, right? I mean, it's that, that that's that's perfectly fine. I mean, sodium itself is not the issue. Um, it's one of these, I would say, food misinformation that exists.
Mm.
I mean, the other food and misinformation is that saturated fat is bad for you.
Mm.
I mean, that's also false, right? I mean,
Mm.
actually, I mean, if you wanted to cook, right? Let's say if you want to have like fried omelet or something like that, um, it's perfectly fine if you cook it in bacon grease, if you cook it in lard or butter or ghee, tallow.
Mm. Mm.
Um, these are animal fats, mostly saturated fats, perfectly fine to cook in those.
What's your opinion on real butter, cooking with real butter, or consuming real butter and margarines?
Margarine.
Yeah, like
Yeah,
synthetic,
margarine
like that
is
synthetic stuff.
yeah, so
What?
margarine is poison basically. So I
Mm.
would say that nobody should be consuming any margarine.
Mm.
It's a plant
Real
oil.
butter, right? Dairy product. Yeah.
Yeah, butter is what you should be cooking with, or you can just put it on your food or whatever directly.
Mm.
It's basically, I mean, it's cream, right? That's like solidified, right? It comes straight from the cow, basically. And that's what you want to add, right? To your food. So what's the problem with the plant oils? So with the margarine, I mean, it's highly synthesized. They used to be used trans fats, which have now been banned because it's been shown to be carcinogenic. And then the issue with a lot of these so-called seed oils that is contained in almost every processed food that we have: soybean, canola, corn, and safflower oils. Um, yeah, those are the worst oils that you could be consuming, especially if you eat it in fried food.
Mm,
Because what happens is that if you take these are the so-called polyunsaturated fatty acids, right? PUFA.
mm,
Um, and if you take these PUFAs and you heat them up in, like high temperature, then they break down. You have these so-called double bonds that are holding these PUFAs together, and they start breaking apart. And then you have a process called oxidation,
mm,
right? The double bonds are going to be exposed to the oxygen in the atmosphere, and you have oxidation. Um, that oxidation, as soon as you consume it in the food, because it will be full of the PUFAs, right? Um, is going to create inflammation in the body, right? So
mm,
that's why, I mean, a lot of people that are struggling with, I don't know, lack of mental clarity, or depression, anxiety, or it could be irritable bowel syndrome. I mean, there's various kinds of inflammation conditions that express themselves in different ways. Might actually be connected to excessive consumption
mm,
of these PUFAs that come from these seed oils.
mm,
Um, Versus if you consume animal fats, animal, I suppose, oils, then you don't have that issue, so what is saturated fat? I mean, saturated fat is basically, it means that it's completely surrounded by hydrogen molecules, right? So which means that there is no double bond, which means there is no oxidation. So it doesn't matter how high you heat your tallow and your butter, um, there is there is no oxidation that gets created from the heat process. And so if you consume anything that is cooked in these animal fats, in those saturated fats, mostly saturated fats, I think maybe a very small amount of PUFAs. I'm not sure about that, but mostly saturated fats. Um,
bad for you. Mm.
no, that is the
Oh,
saturated fats being, um, well, I mean, I wouldn't say it's good for you, but it's definitely not bad for you,
okay.
right? Um, and actually, Um, and actually, fat is a better source of fuel than carbohydrates. Uh, Now, I mean, there's a debate as to like how little carbohydrate you should be consuming. I mean, so I'm not saying that you should go down to zero. I mean, that's probably not necessary,
Mm,
but I would say the optimal range for most people is going to be less than 100 grams per day. That's a low carb diet. Um, Most Americans are consuming about 300 grams a day, um, and that's clearly too much for most people. I
yeah,
mean,
too
you
many
just you
carbs.
just go around and you see, why do we have so much, obesity, type 2 diabetes, etc. Um, yeah. So
Yeah, good
yeah. So,
points.
yeah, just I think, yeah, food education, I think
Critical, yeah.
is the best thing that we can do, and and hopefully, we can push people in a better direction, right? Nudge people um onto onto a better path.
Yeah,
Yeah, so regarding this, um
yeah.
the uh
Go ahead.
political issue, I mean, that we should turn towards, well, I did write a blog post recently about, I think it was the Indian elections.
Oh, Modi getting reelected, right?
Yeah, Modi,
Yeah.
and he was, well, he was reelected,
Yeah.
so it was successful for him. Uh, but but kind of the agenda that he was running, which was, um, you could summarize as Hindu nationalism, right? Basically saying to both the upper and the lower caste Indians, like the Hindus, that they would be, you know, I suppose, the privileged parts
Mm.
of society, and then you can demonize the Muslims that are like the minority, about 14% of the Indian population. There was some legal changes that were being made, right, where they were making it impossible for Muslims from the other countries to be uh, immigrating into India, right?
Mm.
Then I also erected this like Hindu temple, right? And tearing down like a mosque that there was a holy site over there. Um, and
Great
these were
tensions, right? Lots of conflict and tensions with the
yeah.
temple.
So this was part of this like Hindu nationalistic agenda
Hmm.
that he was running, and but the reason why he ultimately got elected was that he was combining it with kind of this positive neoliberal discourse, right? Which is that he's going to bring the jobs, you know, made in India, mass manufacturing.
Mm.
He wants to create 100 million jobs in the manufacturing sector. Um, and on the demographic indicators, I mean, India can go to the world capitalists and the manufacturers and say to them, set up shop in India. I mean, we've got cheap labor, we've got a young workforce. Um, so the demographic case for India is very strong, right? The problem is that um, well, it's not that simple to create manufacturing sites. Um, also, you know, the capitalistic regulations are not that favorable to these foreign capitalists, right? There's a lot of paperwork, there's a lot of bureaucracy, right, in India
Hmm.
that make it difficult to set up shop. Then there's going to be issues regarding um, labor discipline, right? Like how disciplined is the labor force compared to sites in East Asia, for instance. So there were certain issues, and also, yeah, human capital, right? Do you have precisely the talent that you needed? So there were only 5 million manufacturing jobs during Modi's tenure, which is a tiny number considering that, you know, you have, so many young people are streaming into the labor market every year. So, so the jobs promise had not worked out. Um, and I think that's one of the main causes of the electoral losses.
Hmm.
42% youth unemployment. I think it's a serious problem.
Wow,
Um,
that is high.
yeah, yeah, quite significant. Now it's like now it does not result in social instability as of now because in India, I mean, you still have many people that have tribal land or some kind of customary land arrangement where they could basically go home and they would grow their own food in the farms. And so that's kind of like the is like a welfare net basically, right?
Hmm.
For most people. And they also have like these rural employment schemes, right? Oftentimes like doing infrastructure projects in the countryside, and that absorbs some labor force, right? Um, and also you have a huge informal sector. I think 90% of the workforce is
Oh
informal
yeah,
sector.
it's
So
huge.
yeah,
Yeah.
oftentimes like doing work under the table, right? No tax man. That's a way how you might be able to accommodate a lot of people, without making them starve necessarily, right?
Mm,
But they're definitely going to be unhappy, right? You're going to have lots of people that are going to be unhappy about the promises that were made to these young people regarding jobs, right? And that those are being unfulfilled. And it tells you these are the limits actually to nationalistic campaigns. Because
yeah.
with nationalism, I mean, I think nationalism works if you're in opposition, right?
Mm.
So think of like Marine Le Pen, think of AFD.
Populism, maybe like a populist
Yeah,
strategy or something.
yeah, exactly.
FPÖ.
Yeah, FPÖ, right? Donald Trump.
Mm,
If you're in opposition, I think it works really well, right?
mhm. But not the party in power.
Yeah, if you're in power, then it's going to be a problem because basically your agenda is okay. I'm going to screw these minorities, and then the issue is like okay, let's say even if you screw these minorities, right? Like you deport a bunch of foreigners, you put some of the so-called foreign criminals in jail, right? So you do all of these things, and at some point the voters will catch on that that they still don't have a job. That the trash collection is still not working. I don't know, things like that, right?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
really basic things people notice is like, hey, it's still not working, right? And then people start turning against it. In the Indian story, there were two states where the BJP, the ruling government, lost a significant number of seats. In Uttar Pradesh and Maharashtra, these are two big population centers
Mhm.
in India. Um, and in each of those cases, it's the constituencies with a significant Dalit population, which are the
Yeah.
untouchables. It's the lowest
The
caste.
lowest caste, right? Yeah.
Yeah. And also, I think the other backward class castes,
Mhm.
those had voted against uh, Modi. The opposition, which was the Congress Party, they were alleging that the BJP would use the constitutional majority, which they were supposed to be getting in the polls, to remove affirmative action programs.
Mm.
And the Dalits and the backward castes were the ones that are the prime beneficiaries of these programs. And the BJP denied those claims, but that allegation it stuck. It had worked to
So
scare
the
these
affirmative
voters.
action programs in India, does that give like if you're a member of a caste, you get the job before, or I mean you have preferences built in, sort of like US affirmative action policy in the past? It's a kind of preferences based on or diversity of that you have the lowest caste members that also can get government jobs. Is that how it works in India?
That's right. Yeah. So
Yeah,
it's
okay. Okay.
equivalent to the U.S. system. So
Somewhat similar.
yeah. So you have like the civil service. You have
Okay.
the schools, right? Like the education system, the universities,
Okay.
and you have the jobs, right? Yeah. And so those would be the areas where affirmative action would be in effect.
Mm.
And you have to select a certain number of the lower caste to be filling these positions. Um, and the interesting thing about Modi, I mean, um, so Modi is a quite unique figure because the BJP is an upper caste party, right? So upper caste meaning mostly Brahmins, which are
Mhm.
I think the priest caste.
Mhm.
And they fill the top ranks within the BJP. Modi belongs to the OBC, the other backward class, which I think olive pressers, I think was a caste that he came from,
Mm.
and yeah, and so he was able to. So he worked within the Hindu nationalist organizations, which is called the RSS, which you can Google what it stands for, but because
Yeah,
it's some
yeah.
Indian name, it's some long Indian name. Um, and it's a Hindu nationalist organization that allowed him to rise the ranks of the BJP. And he then became leader because he was very charismatic. Plus, he came from the OBC, not from the upper caste. So he
Mhm.
had the cross caste appeal,
Mm.
unifying the Hindu vote. The Hindus are about more than 80% of the population. So, and that was a real appeal where it resulted in two major electoral victories in 2014 and 2019. And in this time, he lost a huge amount of seats, and he's still able to rule with a coalition government, but it's not going to be as, uh, you know,
Easy, huh?
powerful. Yeah, he's not going to be as powerful as he was before. And
Mhm.
to me, this was like a sign. Okay, this is a cautionary tale that you cannot
This is
successfully run. Uh,
nationalistic kind of platform, huh?
that's right, the nationalist
Mhm.
platform. Um, and we see this happen over and over again, right? I mean, like Trump won in 2016, and then he lost the midterm elections in 2018. Now you might say that's not surprising. Presidents always do badly midterm elections. Um, but then he lost the re-election, right? I mean, George H.W. Bush was the last president who lost re-election, right? Um, and yeah, so it is. Now I think, but now with the 2024, it's going to be different because now Biden is the incumbent, Trump is the challenger,
Mhm.
and now I think, I mean, now
It-
it's a big question. I mean, is 2016 going to be the equivalent, or are we going to have a repeat of 2020, right?
yeah.
So, if it's going to be
Well,
like
we
20,
we know what happened in Europe. It shifted to the right. So I don't know. I don't know. It's a prediction. It's hard to predict voter behavior. But it seems in European elections it shifted to the right a little bit.
yeah, there was a major shift to the right, and I mean, France is going to be the really interesting example um, because the RN, the Rassemblement National, they went to, I think, over 30%.
Mm,
The Macron's party went down, I think, about 20% or so. Um, and Then he called the national elections
yeah.
in July, because basically he's trying to tempt the voters. He's saying that, so he knows that the EU elections are oftentimes used to express frustration, right? But then in the national elections, it's going to be different
Mhm.
because the national elections are operated according um, to the I think absolute majority principle,
Yeah.
which
First
means
past the post, right? Yeah.
no, it's not first past the post. It's basically
Oh.
it's still like a list proportionate
Oh, yeah, yeah.
representation, but you
Based
have
on
two
proportional
rounds.
outcome. Okay, okay. Yeah, yeah.
But it's two rounds unless you get the absolute majority.
Mm,
So
okay.
in the EU election, you have you know the proportional list seats, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Um, where basically like however many percent you get, that's the number of percent that you get in seats, right? So
yeah.
if you get 30% of the vote, you get 30% of the seats. That's kind of the EU elections. And in the in the national parliamentary elections, you have to take more than 50% of the vote as a candidate for a seat.
Mm, yeah.
And in that case, um, the the so-called far right has a lower chance of success. Because remember when I think it was a 2022 presidential election, it was Le Pen versus Macron. First round, Le Pen received more than 20%. It was 26%. The Macron received, I think, 21%. He was
Mm,
second ranked. But then in the second round, Macron won by 55%. So it's a 10-point margin
mm,
because you have the people that voted for the other parties, they hated Le Pen even more than Macron. And so they were voting for Macron in the second round.
So he appeals more like a moderate in that sense, centrist.
That's right.
So
Yeah.
far right is not seen as moderate enough for France.
Yeah. So
So
that's what
yeah.
we saw in Austria too, right?
Mm,
It was like, I mean, I always go back to that 2016. We had our own presidential elections.
mm,
Um, and uh, and in the first round, I think that the FPO candidate, Hofer, he received 35%. And then I think the second ranked was the Green Party, which is Van der Bellen. He got, I think, about 30%. So I'm not sure exactly how much, but
mm,
and then the second round, they did it twice because the first time it was ruled invalid because there were some irregularities with the mail-in ballots
mhm,
that were not counted in the proper way or something like that, or too late or something. And then so in the first time they did it, it was like 51-49 for the Green Party. And then they did the second round, and it was then 53-47.
mm,
So which means that you cannot get more than that percentage of the Austrian population, like 40-ish% to vote for the FPO candidate.
mm.
And so now, but then in the national polls right now, if you look at the national parliamentary elections, which are the really important ones,
When are they coming out?
I think in September it was.
Oh, really? This September?
Yeah, it's September. Yeah.
Oh,
And the FPO was polling at 30%,
oh
and
wow.
the OVP and the SPO they poll at I think about 21-23%. So so the FPO is going to probably win the relative majority. So they have, I think that's a solid core, about 30%. After the corruption scandal that basically toppled the last government, they were down to 16%.
Hmm.
Um, but right now with that program, okay, they get up to 30% because the voters have a very short memory, right? They already forgot the corruption scandal that basically brought down the old government.
Yeah.
They were saying that, well, okay, the chief culprit, which was the vice chancellor, already resigned, and he's no longer in politics. So um,
Sebastian Kurz, right?
no, there was another
Yeah.
guy, Strache, right?
Oh,
He was the
Strache
first
too.
guy. He
Okay.
came down in 2019,
Mhm.
and then as a result of the same corruption investigations against Strache, they then uncovered these text messages that were implicating courts in a somewhat different type of scandal, and then he came down in 2021, right? Um, and Yeah, I mean, and that sounds like that sounds like that's normal politics, I suppose, right?
Hmm, yeah. Well, we'll
Unfortunately.
see what happens, I guess, in Austria, other, uh, yeah, European countries, I guess. But Germany, I don't think Germany's going to go. They have Länder elections, but they don't have the parliamentary election, Bundestag, not planned anyways, as far as I know, unless the Ampel, government or something that happens, or there's yeah, vote of confidence or something. But it's unpredictable right now, right? Yeah.
Um,
Unless
yeah,
unless unless I see it differently or you see it differently.
yeah. I mean, it's going to be so the big election is going to be Bundestag, which is going to be in 2025, so it's going to be next year, right? Um, and Yeah, right now, I mean, it's like if you look at the three governing parties, I mean, they poll at about
Mm,
33% combined.
mm, it's not good.
Um, and so I mean, it's a similar thing in Austria, right? I mean, if you count the OVP and the Green Party, I mean, they come to about 30-ish%, right? So, any governing party is going to be inherently unpopular, right? Um, you know, the how do they, get out of that, unpopularity? I mean, um, it's going to be difficult um, because there's a lot of challenges, right? Underlying challenges that exist in these countries. Um, high energy prices, yeah, high levels of inflation, right? So low living standards are kind of
Mm.
being lowered, right? Then the export market is not going to be as secure as before, right? The Germans were actually trying to stop the tariffs on the Chinese electric vehicles, um, because at this point the Chinese are dominating
Mm.
uh, the um, the electric vehicles market. And but then the European Commission, they want to do um, like the higher tariffs,
Yeah.
um, they don't want the so-called what they call the dumping, right? I mean, simply the fact that like the Western countries, the Western electric car companies, um, they're not as competitive as the Chinese companies.
Mm.
So the only way for them to shield their own markets is to impose the
Protectionism.
tariffs.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but then like Germany is going to be very concerned because they're the most exposed to the Chinese market.
Yeah.
Right when I was there in Beijing, I mean, in 2017,
Mm.
Volkswagen was the biggest market share over there. So they're extremely concerned if there was going to be any, uh, you know, reciprocal tariffs that go against uh,
German, yeah, car
German car
manufacturer.
makers. That's what, yeah.
Yeah.
Um, and also, I mean, if they have like, um, you know, if there's like German car companies that are located in China, that's another concern, right? Because when you're trying to sell those Chinese manufactured cars back to the Western markets, you're going to have extra tariffs applied to it. Um, the large companies are not very happy with tariff policies. Um, and then the thing is also that I mean that yeah, I mean the Germans are not going to be as innovative as the US or China for that matter. Even if you look at the issue of mobility, right? Where um, the Germans are living off the legacy of the 19th century technology. You
Mm-hmm.
know, it was Mercedes Benz. They were the ones who developed the combustion engine, 1880s, um, and yeah, they're trying to continue to live off of that for as long as they can, right? Um, and Yeah, and then the interesting thing, I mean, like if you look at some countries, like I mean, China is electrifying very quickly. The electric vehicle fleet is increasing. They want to become energy independent, right? They don't want to be dependent on the oil and the gas that they import from the Middle East and from Russia and from all these other countries. Um, and In the European space, I would say that Norway, the Norwegians, they're very high levels of electric vehicle fleet.
Mm-hmm.
Um, for them, it's quite interesting because they don't actually, as a result of the electrification of the vehicles, they don't consume a lot of the oil that they produce, right?
Yeah.
A lot of the oil that they produce, gas, is going to be exported to the other countries. Um, so they're profiting from the oil and the gas, but their own domestic carbon record is going to be, uh, somewhat less, right? Um, and that clearly encapsulates a big problem, regarding you know, climate change, right?
Big topic, yeah. Big
Yeah.
topic. There's a heat wave in your area too, right?
Yeah, I mean, you can see like the sweat
Flooding,
belts on my forehead. I mean, even though I mean the air conditioning is running all the time. I mean, I think I set it at I think 80 degrees or so,
oh wow.
but still, I mean,
Yeah.
it's running most of the time, and because I
Apparently,
think today they were saying it was 100 degrees, right, or 99 or something, right?
really, in Baltimore?
Yeah, yeah,
Wow, that's abnormal. Yeah,
yeah,
wow.
yeah. I mean, the heat waves are coming,
Yeah.
and you could definitely see the politics of it. I remember there was this BBC interview a couple months ago with the president of Guyana, Irfan Ali, and Guyana is one of the fastest growing economies in the world because they're exporting oil, and they found huge oil deposits back in 2015, and they started exporting in 2019. Um,
Hmm.
and the BBC reporter was asking the president, "Are you not feeling guilty for adding 2 billion tons of carbon into the atmosphere by basically selling the Guyanese oil onto the world market?" And his reply, well, firstly, he said that they have these reforestation projects that are supposed to suck carbon out of the environment.
Hmm.
But then, actually, the second argument was a bigger one, which is um, that it's hypocritical of the West to say that you know that the global South country like Guyana is not able to profit from the fossil fuels when the global North has been
Doing it for,
emitting historically huge amounts of carbon
yeah.
in order to fund the lifestyle of the global North citizens, right? Um, so, why would the global North countries take the audacity to restrict the path to its wealth for a global South country? Um, I mean, a country like Guyana knows that they cannot produce Apple iPhones. They will not produce, you know, BMW cars,
Hmm.
or Toyotas or whatever. Historically, they were exporting rice and bauxite. Those were the two core commodities, and manganese and things like that. And now, more recently, now they discovered the oil, and the oil is now taking over most of the export economy.
Hmm.
Um, and they make very fair claims regarding the contest between the global north and the south countries. Um, and they are unfortunately in a position where they're being put under threat by the neighboring Venezuela, right? Because in
Hmm.
Venezuela, I mean, they have their own presidential elections that are happening, and the opposition candidate has already been disqualified. The U.S. is now reapplying sanctions against Venezuela. And one way how the President Maduro thought that he would be able to distract his own people was by talking up a conflict, an armed conflict with Guyana,
Oh, really? I missed that one.
over which they had placed territorial claims for the last 170 years or so, right? So
Hmm.
it's really,
I'll have to
uh,
read up on that. I haven't read anything about
really heated.
you. Yeah, impressive.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and yeah, and they wanted to control, and the Venezuelans, they wanted to control 2/3 of the territory of Guyana. Um, and yeah, so it's a very complex matter that a small country like Guyana finds itself in. And of course, they were receiving that aggression because they were discovering the oil, right? Now, um, Venezuela sees the um, Guyanese territory as being highly desirable, right?
Hmm. So
Because
you
of
think
all
there'll
the
be a
reasons.
military conflict?
Well, we don't know at this point, because you could also make the argument that Maduro is quite risk averse, that he's very concerned about applying too much, or exerting too much of military aggression, right? Um, but um, but but there's going to be a risk. In the volume that I just recently brought out with my blog posts, I argued that we have these three acute stresses in global politics. Um, the first is climate change. The second is the AI revolution.
Hmm.
Like basically displacing jobs, and maybe taking over the whole society. And the third factor is geopolitical conflicts. Um, each of which we're seeing more and more tit for tat escalation, right? U.S. China is a major one. Then you have U.S. versus Russia. Then you have the smaller conflicts, right? Like Venezuela, Guyana, or um, the conflict in Yemen, the conflict in Gaza, right?
Sudan, right?
Israel, Gaza,
Is there,
Sudan.
yeah, it's global, yeah, definitely.
Yeah, so these are like the acute crises, and we'll have to see, how high those global tensions can become ultimately, right?
Hmm.
Um, yeah, we're not addressed the AI point at this point. I mean,
Yeah, you
but
wrote,
um,
go ahead, let's
but
hear what
but,
you're,
but yeah, but yeah, AI is I think is one of the biggest um interesting challenges, I would say. I'm not sure whether it has gotten to the level of all out threat to our existence. But I mean, I take certain creative professions like Hollywood, the Hollywood writers, right? The people that are writing and designing the movie scripts and the TV scripts. Um, and also, I mean, anybody that is connected with the movie industry. So it would be the actors, but also those behind the scenes, like the cameraman, the makeup artists, the stage prop artists, and so on and so forth. And all of these occupations that are connected with the movie industry, which is a highly labor-intensive industry, are going to be uh, threatened by AI. There was a plan by Tyler Perry. He's one of the major, you know, like TV, I think, studios in the U.S. South. And he had this $800 million expansion project. He wanted to expand the franchise, wanted to hire more people into the business to create more um,
all right.
movie and TV shows.
Mhm.
And he stopped the expansion because he saw the capabilities of AI, the AI script writing, the CGI, which is the computer generated imagery.
Mhm.
Um, you know, like with CGI, I find it questionable why anybody would hire a stunt actor, for instance, right? Because I mean, you have to consider the risks that come with like action movies with dangerous stunts.
Mhm.
Now, you replace the stunt actors with the CGI, right? And and you reduce the need for them, right? Um, if you think of like actors that have long ago passed away, Marlon Brando, for instance, or whatever, Sean Connery or something like. I mean, you could bring these old actors back to life.
Isn't that crazy? Star Wars too, right? Prince Leia, I think. They brought her
That's
back.
right.
Yeah.
You can bring the dead actors back to life. Um, and then if I'm a living actor, right? So if I have to make my money by basically shooting new movies, um, I would be extremely concerned.
Competing
Uh,
with dead actors that are digital.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
And then all of the people that are on the set, right? The cameramen, the stage prop people, the makeup artists, etc. I mean, like if you can generate everything completely realistically, I mean, I'm not even talking about like these pixel movies, right?
Mm.
Like where it's like whatever with like animated figures, right? Where I mean, everybody knows that it's like all computer generated, right? Uh,
Avatar.
yeah, the Avatar, yeah.
Mm.
But no, those franchises. But even if you take, let's say, these realistic movies, right, where it kind of looks like you have these real actors, but um you could make it completely CGI, right?
Mm.
Um, or yeah, the movie script writers. I mean, these are like, I mean, I would say the intellectual gravitas behind a movie or a TV show is what the writers produce, right? Because without the movie script, you have nothing, right?
Mm.
Um, and with AI, I mean, no, okay, there's a counter argument, which is that AI can only reproduce certain aspects, basically because it feeds on past movie scripts, right? So it will only be able to reproduce the existing genres of the movie scripts. Um, um, Now, there's going to be some deep learning models that are going into creativity, right? But basically, I mean, think of like taking multiple like genres of
Mm.
script writing, and then you try to meld them together, right?
Mm.
Into creating something new in that way. Um, you know, as dumb as the AI is right now, right? That's how dumb as it's ever going to get. In other words, it's going to keep getting smarter from here on forward.
Mm.
Um, if you think about, yeah, I think the way how it was explained to me, I think somebody from OpenAI said it that, if let's say a couple years ago, the original like version of ChatGPT was like a kindergarten level, right?
Mm.
And then I think when the GPT was released to the public, it was in November of 22. It was operating at like a high school student level, and now it's like, well, it's probably like an advanced college student. And then I just listened to the interview with Mira Murati, who's the chief technology officer at OpenAI, and she said that next year, 25, it's going to be um, operating at a PhD graduate level,
I believe it. Yeah.
right? Um, and yeah, so so I mean, so there's multiple angles in which you can be looking at it, philosophical
Well,
angles. Um,
honestly, I just would put AI in the realm of the risk society theory. I mean, it's just like any other risk, that we technology as a risk has or side effects and unforeseeable consequences, if you like to use that phrase. I mean, AI is definitely carries a can of worms, that for occupations, for different sectors. You named it. I mean, you just named it. I mean, you were saying movie industry is one example. The actors that could be replaced, script writers could be replaced, screenwriters, stuntmen. So it fits. AI is embedded. If we don't control it, if we don't regulate it, then it has consequences for becoming real risky, including for its use in military warfare, or I like what Pope Francis, he gave a little speech at G7, and I really recommend it, even to our listeners, but it was about 25 minutes. And he ultimately, he's coming from a kind of religious perspective, but he was saying that we cannot erase politics when it comes to AI. We will have to make political decisions on this because it could interfere with all sorts of different phases in our lives and also ethical questions, real ethical considerations. I think he gave a couple of examples in his speech, but one of it was autonomous warfare, and then also ethical questions that could be raised. But I guess, yeah, I would just put it under the realm of AI is in the risk society as we know it, and we have perhaps underestimated its risk, and we should think of it as a real definite, problem if we don't have precautionary principles in place or something in preventing it. Because then it becomes Terminator 2, a little
Yeah.
sci-fi.
So the way how it works is, I
Mm,
mean, we don't have the precautionary
yeah,
principle
yeah. What do you think?
because in the history of technology,
Mm,
you know, we have never gotten to a point where we stop technology development altogether, right? And I think, and that's
mm,
because of this element of competition, right? So the way how AI is being framed by the policymakers is that our country has to develop it first before our enemy develops it, right? So because we know that there's AI labs in China, and then the US regards China as the competitor, it will then want to invest in AI development within its own borders, right? And like if you look at the Soviet Union, Cold War, right? They were the first to send a space mission, right? And then the US, which has a more kind of like free market attitude, um, they were then saying, well, we have to develop NASA, we have to develop our own space program.
mm. Oh,
And so
in competition to Sputnik, right? Was there getting on?
Sputnik, that's right. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's right.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And
Okay.
so if competition is the way how we organize the global economy, then I believe that the pressure to promote technology is going to be so huge. And even if you forget about the kind of like a market-based argument, I mean, it's about, um, I mean, I suppose the economists, I mean, they call it utility maximization, right? Which is, I mean, it's a very, um, I don't know, unnecessarily convoluted way of putting it.
Mm,
But I would say it is the desire for comfort, I suppose, where the desire for comfort, right? I mean, like, so right now, because I know, I've used GPT to write, sections of like, you
mm,
know, papers, for instance, right? Like a methodology section or something like that. Um, and, um, and it does a pretty good job of it, if you give it the right prompt, right? And of course, sometimes you have to edit, just to get it to what you want. Um, but yeah, I would desire for OpenAI and for these other AI companies to produce better algorithms over time, right? So if you could optimize it even slightly more, right? Um, Because right now, for instance, I think for the free version, I mean, they probably don't let you produce graphs, for instance, right? Even though, I mean, like if I say, please download this data and produce me this graph, I'm sure, I think for the paid version, they probably offer it, not for the free version.
Mm,
Um, but yeah, so the desire for the comfort, I think, is going to push for more and more of these AI developments.
definitely, yeah.
Um, and now the thing about, are we going to get to the luxury communism, right? Which is kind of where many of us want to drive it towards. It's hard to say because right now, I mean, all these AI companies. I mean, I went to this AI conference,
Mm,
and there was some academics, but they also invited industry reps, and one of them was like, I think he has this AI company where it's about automating PowerPoints, right?
mm,
So you're supposed to be able to input one sentence prompt, basically the topic of your PowerPoint, and it will produce, 20 slides, or however many slides that you
yeah,
specify.
I
And
believe
they're
it.
actually pretty good slides, actually. I mean,
I believe it, yeah.
it's like pretty good summaries of, like, let's say if you say, you know, give me, um, you know, uh, like PowerPoint slides on the sociology of risk, and then it would probably have like the Ulrich Beck as one of the first slides in it, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And then you can fine tune it, right? You can say, um, you know, add one more slide that talks about Ulrich Beck's, biography, right? Something like that.
Yeah.
Um, so because obviously, I the model, I think it would probably draw from like the internet, like all of the information,
Yeah.
and those are certainly available, right?
Of course. Of course.
That kind of stuff. So, um, and so that's where, I mean, but all of these products, I mean, they still cost money, right? That's the main thing. So, they have like a free trial version, and then usually after 2 weeks, they're like, hey, pay us, $10 a month, and then you can keep using it, right?
Yeah, get the premium account.
The premium account, that's right. And so that's what makes it still classically capitalist, right?
Hmm.
Like, I mean, the whole point of capitalism, I mean, you keep things scarce by charging for it, right? Um, and then you can create more, of these products, right? Um, and that actually is a strike against the luxury communism argument, right?
Mm,
Because you're still going to have a digital divide, not just among people who can afford to have the internet and those who do not,
right.
but even those who can afford the internet are like, well, can I afford this AI service so I can produce more stuff?
Another way to maybe think about it is there will be more and more, very affluent people that become affluent off of AI. They will get their AI dividends for life. The question is, for the broader population, especially those of us who support UBI, where are our AI dividends? I mean, so there'll be an unequal distribution of the benefit, and those that have vested, themselves into the AI, stocks. I mean, the biggest company right now, I think, was it the company that surpassed Apple? Kind of,
Nvidia.
yeah, they will produce an enormous amount of wealth. AI will probably, companies that work together with AI will have an advantage in the marketplace, and that will create lots of rich people, or few rich people, and it may also have an effect on the companies, right? But think about the overall benefit as far as financially, not the technology itself, but the financial benefit. I'm thinking of that. How does that supposed to trickle down, if it ever trickles down?
Yeah,
That's the criticism I have. Either you tax it, the state has to be able to tax it in some form, so it doesn't suck up too much of the this different sectors in our economy, because it starts to even go into academic publishing, it can go into educational sectors, it can go into governmental sectors, military. I mean, where does it stop? Where does it end? Like it can eat up a lot of portion of our economy. I'm hypothetically in 25, 30 years. I could imagine a scenario like that where it becomes dystopian. But now I think this is optimism, whereas everything is seen as utopian. AI is a possibility, we can embrace it and reduces workload. You see that in sci-fi themes, prospects of luxury, like you said, communism, leisure society for all, we can reduce dirty work, but then it has a dystopian side, right? It has this double-edged sword. Then it also has the possibility of a Terminator, right? We produce, or
yeah,
possibly, right? Or
uh,
the we can no longer be able to control it. And this technology will lose control over it. At what point it becomes so autonomous, self-regulatory, or self-managing that it's unable to be controlled anymore, right? Or when we are able to unplug it, for instance, or what mechanisms do we have in place to control it, right? Like we can well, the programmers or but the algorithm stuff, that's pretty interesting for me. It seems like it's very autonomous. Right? You would have to literally like take it then out of the technology that we're using it in, or the right.
so if you just look at the labor market implications, I mean,
Yeah.
so the empirical results, they have been showing that the so-called low productivity workers,
Mm.
um, they have the productivity increased by generative AI substantially, much more than the high productivity workers, right? Um, and that's like a typical economist, finding, right? Where
Mm.
people that, you know, I mean, like if you think of like if you're like a really poor person and you spend a little bit more money, your utility goes up so much higher, right? So it's going to be a much bigger net benefit for you because you're going to start buying like high quality foods, right? So your health gets better and stuff. Versus if you are like Warren Buffett, right? And if you make another $1 billion, I mean, it's not going to change your lifestyle because you already consume everything you want to consume, right?
Yeah, in a lifetime, right?
Yeah, right. So, and the same principle even with the high and the low productivity workers, where it's the low productivity workers, those that produce the least amount of goods and services, whatever. Um, by adding this generative AI, they would have the biggest benefit. And within the economist calculations, then they're saying, well, this should be reducing the amount of income inequality, right?
Mm.
Because if the average marginal product of the lowest productivity worker is higher than for the high productivity workers, then the differences between the low and the high productivity should eventually disappear. Um,
Mm.
and so that's an interesting argument.
Yeah.
Um, but I'm not sure how far this argument can go in actual fact.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to observe it, and having statistics, and we can see how it develops.
Yeah, because so the one measure of inequality is between, so basically the within workforce comparison, right? So
Mhm.
between, as I mentioned, the high productivity, low productivity workers, right? Um, but then the second level of comparison is, well, what about the workers and the non-workers, right? Because so if the AI is
Mm.
able to increase the productivity, I mean, think of like, again, going back to the movie example, right? Let's say
Mm.
if I am a movie director, right? And I know that I can, let's say I'm one of the top movie directors, right? I'm like a Quentin Tarantino, right? Like
Mhm.
really one of the people at the top, right, of my field.
Mhm.
And let's say with the help of AI, I can produce, let's say, I don't know, 10 times as many movie scripts, as I can without it.
With less labor required. Right?
Yeah, correct. So
Yeah.
basically with the same amount of labor even, right?
Mm,
Because I just have my team, right? Quentin Tarantino's team, and they use the generative AI to produce these movie scripts, and they produce the whole movie, right? With a low budget, right? Now, then if I am like a low performing movie director, meaning my movies, like if I put them out, they would probably be struggling in the market. Like I'm not going to get a lot of viewership, and I don't get a lot of sales revenues.
mm,
Um, in the old system, I would have still had a chance um, to compete with the Tarantino types, right? Because he could only produce so many movies, right? Now, if if Tarantino produces 10 times the number of movies as before,
mm,
and the quality of the movies that he has, because I mean it's not just the quality of the movie, it's the reputation, right? Because there's a lot of viewers, movie viewers, going to the cinema for the ticket because they know it's a Quentin Tarantino movie, right?
mhm.
Because they know that his movie is a brand, right? So it has a certain, they attach it with a certain kind of quality to it, right?
Yeah, prestige. Yeah.
The prestige, exactly. So
Mhm,
so then, but then consumer budgets are limited, right? I mean, you cannot be watching 10 times more Tarantino movies and then watch the kind of peripheral movies, right? So in that way, so if you say, well, we're solving one form of inequality by saying, well, the high and low productivity should be equalizing, you could also say that, well, the high productivity ones are the ones who use the AI the most, plus they have the highest level of reputation,
mm,
they can push out everybody else. I mean, it's like so in the music world. I mean, we already see this happening, right?
yeah.
Like if I'm Taylor Swift, right, and I say, okay, well, for her, I think her concerts are basically like planned years ahead of time, right? Right. So she announces a concert that it's going to be held in a certain location 2 years from now, and on the first day, it's already sold out, right?
Yeah. She's a
Um,
star. Has a master status,
right. Um,
Celebrity status.
absolute celebrity status, and so then the smaller fish, the smaller artists, they're going to struggle, right? Because there's a fixed entertainment budget. I mean, if I go to a Taylor Swift concert, I don't have the time to go to the low reputation concert.
Mhm.
And so, you know, um, like a displacement effect, right? Verdrängungseffect, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, is kind of is in operation, right? Um, and and I think that AI is going to make it worse.
Mhm.
Um, you know, yeah, it's just you're going to give more advantage to people at the top, and that's why I'm saying that UBI is becoming more and more relevant as time goes on. I would say, um,
Yeah, I'm with you there.
but then there's this other argument about demographics, right?
What if the naming of it, renaming it, we want our AI dividends, where are our AI dividends? I want my AI dividend.
Well,
You
that's how
know,
Andrew Yang was branding it. If you
really?
remember,
Oh, okay. Oh,
well,
he,
yeah, I think he called it like tech check or something, or
yeah.
AI dividend or something like that. I mean,
Mhm. maybe
Uh,
we have to ask Carl Witterquest once to give us a breakdown on UBI and how we would reframe it in this AI world, because it does. I mean, if we embrace AI as the way we're doing it, that should automatically be a case for UBI. I don't understand the logic of denying the fact that labor will be, further reduced, the need for work will be scarce, and certain jobs will be automated, eliminated, will be a new reserve army of labor problem, and so might as well open up. You and I are, I think, in agreement with UBI. Just a matter of, I guess, public support, or how we already did enough experiments. I don't know why they got to keep making more experiments and all this experiment. We got to figure out, just do it.
yeah. So,
AI.
so you're referring to the
Yeah.
basic income group,
Yeah,
um,
there's,
and
go ahead, go ahead, go ahead.
yeah, there's a bunch of mayors in the U.S. and basically what they're doing is they're approaching Silicon Valley directly, right?
Mhm.
So they go to people who are already favorable. I mean, people like Chris Hughes, the guy who actually funded one of the University of Michigan conferences. That's where I met Richard Caputo, with whom I produced a volume on UBI.
Mhm.
But so there's already favorable favorable people in Silicon Valley with a lot of money, and they don't mind writing like, you know, 10, 20, $30 million check for, let's say, a city to run the so-called pilot programs, right?
Mhm.
Now, the problem is that these tech billionaires, I mean, they're not interested in like running like a national level UBI program, right? They probably couldn't afford that anyway. I
A
mean, it's like,
national redistribution plan or
yeah,
something.
it would be like the program that would cost several $1 trillion a year, basically. Um,
Yeah.
and that's probably not sustainable for them,
Yeah.
and they probably don't want to do it. And so they keep funding these pilot programs to basically keep reminding the government officials that, this is a program that they should be doing. Um, but then I think I have a worry that, if you keep it chronically at that level, right?
Yeah.
Basically, you have literally crumbs that were dropping off the plate of the billionaire class, right? Um, yeah, then I'm worried that like that there's not as much impetus, right? Because the politicians, they might be saying, "Hey, look at all of this billionaire philanthropy." I mean, it's like we don't have to do anything
Mhm.
on our end. It's like
Yeah, that's it. Philanthropy is just, yeah, attempt to get out of that. Yeah. Never
to
looked at it that
to
way.
not do the welfare programs, and so.
Yeah.
But again, so that's why I mean,
Yeah.
I think one of the, now I'm going to be ripped apart for saying this, but
No, go ahead, go
I
ahead.
I, I think one of the blessings of the Trump presidency, it was not so much of what he himself was doing. I don't think that he produced that much effective result, but actually what happened when Biden came in, right? The CHIPS Act, like the investments in the manufacturing sector. Um, you had the pandemic recovery spending, something like that, which was about infrastructure investments, um, and investments in the solar panels, the battery cells, solar cells, batteries. Um, and now, of course, the opposition, the Republicans, try to trash these programs, saying, "Well, there's been a lot of government waste, et cetera," right? But I mean, the kernel of that idea of this Biden program, right, was to say, if we want to prevent Trump from winning again, then the Democratic Party has to spend more money on these infrastructure job creation programs. Right?
Mhm.
That this would be a way of government directed redistribution, so that the people that were feel like they were left out by the Hillary Clinton Obama consensus, that they would feel like they're part of this economy again, right?
Mm,
And
yeah,
so yeah, I mean, it's like it's often, I mean, it's like if you have a negative event, I think then the rulers are like, okay, we have to do something, right?
yeah.
So I mean, like Ukraine war. I mean, if you look at like NATO military spending, I think almost all the countries in NATO, I mean, maybe four or five exceptions, they are spending at least 2% of the budget on the military now.
Military Keynesianism. Yeah.
Yeah, where it's like, well, before they were kind of like, well, why are we wasting this money on the war? We're not even fighting any wars. It doesn't concern us. And now it's like, okay, there's a war that's happening in our continent. We have to get ready. We have to get prepared for it. Um, and if you don't want to fight the war, you have to be ready for the war, right? Um,
Mhm.
so and that's you have something bad that is happening, and then the officials react. And so I think with AI, something similar has to happen, right? Where I mean, it's kind of sad to say it, but yeah, it's like we would have to have an actually bad experience, something bad
Like
that is
a
happening with AI. Hopefully, nothing
like
until every
like a
species.
major depression or something, or
Yeah, I
maybe.
mean, economic crisis would be a possibility, or basically AI starting to restrict our freedom, our life options, right?
Mm.
Um, and you know,
So something dystopian, right?
yeah, something that pushes us in a dystopian direction, such that it jolts us out of the torpor, right?
Let's use a metaphor of like asbestos. We were thinking that this was really good stuff we put in our homes, and then asbestos, we found out it started killing us. So maybe the same metaphor with AI. We think of it as an asbestos of technology. I
Yeah, if
like
it
using that.
starts to turn against us, I think then
Yeah,
that,
that's the
that
best
then
way.
you have
Yeah.
a reaction to it. Um, yeah, I mean, like, so what's your
Mm.
take on
I,
AI in education, right? I mean, because
I guess my fundamental criticism goes back to this technological determinism. Maybe I'm kind of, we think of it as possibility as removing agency, and that it is just becomes part of our structure that seems like we're not able to have effect on it. And actually, I think AI goes back to this dilemma of the structure agency debate. How much agency do we still allow? How much autonomy of humans? How much free will do we, or see a possibility in AI? Or are we on the side of it's just deterministic technology? It's going to control us, or just you know have attributes where we no longer have control over it. I really think from that standpoint, I think it's a good discussion between structure agency, but in this dilemma of AI as a prospect, something that could um allow human agency, like you said. I mean, it could also be useful for people to expand productivity, and creativity may be enhanced. Who knows? Everything from sex robots to self-creating systems. But on the other hand, though, it has a structure component. Like, how much will it be embedded in all of this in our economy? How much will it be embedded in military institutions? This is like a 1984 scenario.
yeah, just on this topic of like the
Yeah.
sex robots, I
Uh,
mean, that is another major concern because
uh,
if you think about like if you're trying to drill down the human species, right?
mhm,
The most essential unit, and you don't have to be socially conservative to say this, it is the family, right? Because all of us are born into a family, right? Well, I guess some people are adopted, but most people are probably like within biological families.
mhm,
Um, and anything that sort of undermines this archaic structure, like archaic, by archaic, I mean, I don't mean obsolete, but just like this very old structure that we have,
Mm-hmm.
is going to basically, destroy us as a species, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the worry about the sex robots is if you can make the sexual and emotional experience of the sex robots as good, if not better,
Mm-hmm.
than the real human, then the rational thing, I mean, obviously, like if I was sort of like thinking far ahead, then I
Mm-hmm.
would say, well, okay, I just have a little bit fun with the sex robot, and then I'm gonna find an actual human partner to procreate and so forth, and maybe you could construe it as such. But there's going to be enough of a subset of the population where they're like, okay, this sex robot is so amazing. I do not have to look for a real partner. Uh, I do not have to deal with the struggle of a real person, because I mean, oftentimes,
Mm-hmm.
with a real person, you're going to have some friction. I mean, that's natural. There is no friction that you would have with a robot, because you program the robot to be submissive, right? I mean, unless you know, program in a personality that's a little bit more assertive. But then even then, it's like it's up to the discretion of the robot owner, right? To
That's the
basically,
cultural conservative argument that
um,
the Pope was trying to bring in. I think he was trying to at G7, he was saying that ultimately this technology is like any other tool, that we have to make ethical decisions because that's what we have to do. It's like he's coming from a conservative point of view, like he thinks it will have ramifications for, like you said, the family model and like I don't know if he went towards sexuality, but I think in his speech, he was concerned about its direction, the possibility that it will open up a can of worms, questions of ethics, things like that. But back to the sex robots. What I'm worried about is the financialization of AI and how you would then have private equity firms that get into this, and the downside is then it would be purely profit motive, which we already have that in economy, but we need to be very careful. Like this is a very powerful technology. There's a very powerful usage of it, right? That it needs me to take a further step, but we can't anticipate the risk yet. We know it's there, but we just don't know how much of a risk it will produce for fertility rates, social life, cultural life, right? Job loss, right? It will really, yeah, it will be the question next 25 years. I think you'll get to see it. Hopefully we'll see some of it still, but like the next generations, I don't know how they're going to deal with it, you know.
yeah,
So it's a can of worms.
yeah. There's a possibility of the self elimination in this way. I mean, and
Yeah,
and 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 that's very interesting because there's some people, some philosophers, they're concerned about the killer robots, right?
yeah.
Basically, the autonomous robots that decide that we humans are a vermin and we have to be eliminated, right? If they get to that conclusion and there's no stop button. So,
Mhm.
but actually, I mean, for me, the, the, that would be like a really acute crisis, right? If you have killer robots. But if you have, let's say, sex robots,
Yeah,
in my view, I mean, this is actually even more pernicious form, right?
yeah.
Because what you're doing is, I mean, you are in that way you're undermining the family because you're making people infertile effectively, right?
Mhm.
By tying, because I mean, there's no biological offspring with a sex robot, right? So
Yeah.
in
I,
that
I
sense,
I think it would also influence or alter biological sex reproduction. I can think it could go to a point where people become so synthetic or live in technology, live their lives through technology. AI makes a possibility, right? That's where you see a lot of these sci-fi films of you literally could live your life digital in a digital world, but it could really then radically influence our biological reproduction, our biologies, like how we live together, how we reproduce, right? I really think that could, I mean, that's what the movies are all about. The sci-fi movies are
Yeah, well,
always.
the like Wall-E is that main
Yeah,
movie, right? Where it's like you have these like obese people and they
mm,
sit in front of these screens and
yeah.
then it just moves them around on like a
I mean,
vehicle basically, right?
yeah. Uh, fictional utopia, you know?
Yeah, and then
Yeah,
so
AI, I think, is partly utopia. Everything we try to put into it, like, it's the new God, the new thing that will just rescue us, save us if we just trust in this thing. And so that's the risk. I think we definitely we're not thinking about its potential risk too much. It
yeah,
doesn't have to be you don't have to be a sociologist or psychologist to know that. Just think about that.
yeah, but so within our own field of education,
Mhm.
right? I think that the educational mission has fundamentally changed. Now, I mean, most of us, I mean, we don't really want to reckon with it formally because, we kind of want, ultimately, we want the status quo to keep going for as long as possible.
Mhm.
But the status quo of education has changed completely because when I say, okay, we design assignments for the students, right?
Mhm.
Take home essays and writing papers, right? Think writing memos. And at this point, I can assume, without having to necessarily prove it, but I can assume that most people are going to be using, uh, you know, generative AI to produce their assignments.
Mhm.
And now there's different, I mean, when I talk with the teaching colleagues, I mean, so some of them are saying, well, but you also have like AI that can like turn it in, right? Like
Mhm.
this
Yeah,
software
yeah.
that figures out whether it's like
Zero chat
AI,
GPT.
whether it's like AI generated. So that's like one response that I hear from some colleagues. Um,
Yeah.
and then there's another set of colleagues that think that, well, you have to change the assignments, right? You have to, I think that's what you mentioned, right? Which is like you want to add like examples of from your own life, right?
Which it can do
Your own,
that. It can do that now too,
oh
apparently.
yeah,
It can
um,
produce it.
like biographic
Yeah.
explanations.
Some people
Uh,
try to include examples. Give me an example that we discussed in this moment in this lecture. So then they would have to have known the lecture that you gave. That
well,
could be one way.
unless they audio taped you and
If
fed it to the
post,
algorithm.
yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Yeah.
One more. I don't know how much time we have left, but like, I thought about this. I could see a scenario where AI will have to be put into uh, things like legal constitutions or like laws. You know what I mean? Like our legal system has a lag, and just like any other technology, I think ultimately they will have laws pertaining to AI. And even the US Constitution or UN Charter, I can imagine scenarios where they'll put AI in there somewhere and they'll have some laws pertaining to it. I don't know exactly what, some kind of arrangement, some kind of view of its limitations or what its ethical issues should be resolved, or however. I think that could be a reality. I mean, we already are seeing that um in technology itself, but with AI, I would see it. I could see that. That's the last thing I wanted to add. That I could, like, we put it in our syllabus. I mean, professors, like, we sometimes put uh, AI usage policy, but on a
So
le
what is your policy?
trying to remember how I wrote it. Um, uh, that, it fits under technology use policy, and, you are kind of required to give sources for your text, and uh, should definitely not be solely used by AI technology, something like that. I'll share it with you if you want.
Well,
I think it's
but I
always,
think that
I think
nowadays
they
with
put it under,
ChatGPT, you
yeah,
can input like write me a student essay
500 words. Yeah.
with references. I
Yeah.
think you
Yeah.
can put that into the ChatGPT, and you can also specify that you don't want fake sources, right? Because that was the issue with like
Yeah.
the hallucination of sources, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Some professors say like an honor code, like, yeah, you shouldn't, even if you're going to use it, you shouldn't. So it kind of puts the onus on them, like if an instructor wants to double check, whatever the institutional policy is, department policy on this, it'll be, yeah. Uh, so
but then okay,
yeah,
then you're gonna have an imbalance though, right? If you have an honors code,
yeah,
because like let's say if you have let's say two hypothetical students
right,
with similar writing abilities and skills, and one of them adheres to the honors code and the other uses ChatGPT,
yeah,
uh, you're gonna give the GPT student an A, and you're gonna give the the poor writing student, let's say a D,
mm,
and right, and so you can already see where the injustice is, and then it creates these
yeah,
uniform incentives or pressures, right?
yeah.
Where it's like, if I am the student that does not use GPT, I'm going to be the dumbass.
You'll have
Right.
an advantage. Yeah,
So I would, and because I know that all of my colleagues are using it, or most of my colleagues are using it,
yeah,
then I will want to use it as well. Because I mean, you have to consider that for many people, I mean, they think of education as like a tournament system, right?
hmm,
That the
very
high
competitive.
GPA and the high placements in like whatever GRE or different kind of exams, right? MCAT puts them onto a path to obtain basically the next position in the career ladder, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's why people are so anxious about the GPA. And the thing is that it's the most rational thing for you then, as an individual,
Yeah,
to use ChatGPT.
yeah, that's true. What would Randall Collins, what do you think he would say on this when it comes to credentialization and AI in the future? How do you think he would twist this?
Well, so
Uh,
basically, what would happen is that you would have more and more credentials that are going to be added.
on top of
Because,
the,
yeah, so because if it's so easy for people to obtain it, uh, you would have to increase the amount of the credentials up to the point where you equilibrate the labor market, right?
yeah,
Meaning, like if you reach a point where you can press the labor supply down to the level of where the demand is, right?
hmm,
Then the credential inflation will stop at that point.
hmm,
Right? So let's say if you have, I mean, let's say there's the average professional worker, right? Like for doctors, I mean, it's the most egregious example, right? You're
yeah, yeah, yeah,
going to be
10
like
years.
35 years old before you become a practicing physician, right?
Yeah, at least.
Right. So
If you
have,
pass the medical exam too.
that's right. Yeah. So that in that way, I mean,
Or
you restricted the
test.
supply
Yeah.
of the doctors so much that the wages for the doctors are going to be pretty high, and it's a pretty safe job, I would say. to be a physician. Um, and that's kind of the logic of
Yeah.
credentialization. And now it's a big question. So I raise this big question about like how legitimate are the universities?
Mhm.
Because if let's say if you have some employers who are saying, I don't need people with a BA or with a master's or with a PhD. I need people who are able to deliver me this product, you know, probably using AI, preferably using AI,
Mm.
knowing how to use these tools. And and then yeah, it's like I don't need the college. It's just an unnecessary credential.
I could see that. Yeah, people would make that argument.
And that would
Unfortunately,
be that's a
catastrophic, catastrophic. Mm.
catastrophic for the legitimacy of the university as an institution.
This is the way I would do it, Larry, theoretically. Okay. If I was looking at this through the sphere of institutions, boundaries, and autonomy, right? So I actually sometimes encourage students to write papers on this. Like, historically, if you're looking at it through a functionalist kind of worldview, like you have the important institutions, you want to run down the list, the family, the schools, education, the scientists, the media. You know this, right? This is like political system. Uh, I think where with AI, one institution, let's just call it science and technology, is so dominating, it starts to penetrate and ignore the boundaries of those other institutions. So the necessity, I think, for society to function like it should, it has to have boundaries between institutions. And AI, I think, blurs that. I think AI blurs this boundary, and it takes over all of these institutions in our lives, and like even education, we already talked about that, economic, and it blurs them to where there is no boundaries, and then we have the problem. And when economic principles influence technology, that's one example. um, when solely we use technology principles to dictate other institutions, that also creates a problem. That's what I'm getting at. What I'm getting at is that, like, if you look at it through that perspective, historically, there's a reason why, the state was separated from religion, that those are two incompatible institutions, and they develop differently in different spheres. The same thing, I think, with AI. I think AI fits under science technology, if you want to put it that way. And it just became so powerful now that it's encroaching on all the other previous institutions that have historically been separated. It blurs them, or it penetrates them. I don't know if that makes sense. Does that make sense to you? What I'm getting at? So we it's sort of this idea that it becomes so powerful that it starts to ignore those boundaries, that blurs them or infiltrates them too much, and that there needs to be this. You can use the word functional differentiation, right? That's Luhmann's term, I think. Luhmann uses that word a lot. That there's a reason why we have differentiated institutions, and they have their own goals and their own boundary distinctions. Yeah, it's very, I know, very theoretical, but it's a way to think about it. I mean, if one institution, like, or let's call it the technology science realm, in this case, the example of AI becomes so powerful, it, challenges other, like the education sector. We can see that right now. It's sort of blurred together more and
right.
more. PowerPoint. Yeah. Does that make sense? No? I
Yeah.
like it. It's it's a way to theoretically at least do these thought experiments, that differentiate, or are part of modern problems that we face in modern societies that are highly complex and are not able to solve these dilemmas of boundaries. Yeah,
Yeah, so I mean, the major issue is that
yeah,
you have everything becoming subservient
exactly.
to this AI, and I mean, but I would say that
Uh-huh.
the AI itself is subservient to capitalism, right?
Okay, I'll look at it that way.
Because you have, again, all of these AI companies that are highly valued in the stock market, right? They're at the top of these S&P 500 companies. They require a huge amount of capital infusion, right? They require these data centers, electricity. They require the top talent, right? The workforce, the engineers, right? The technicians, um, to develop these products, these algorithms. Um, and then, of course, you try to sell it through the subscription model, right? So you have these AI websites
Hmm.
where they say, you pay $10 a month, right? And so everything becomes subservient to capital.
It's a commodity, right?
Yeah, it's a commodity. And then it's a commodity, it's like the goal of capitalism is to increase its value over time. That is
Hmm.
the only goal of capital. Right? So the number 10, right? You make, let's say, $10 in profits must become 15, must become 20, must become 25, and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
So you want to see that number that is in the account, in the financial account, you want to see that number increase. That is
Hmm.
the goal of capital. And and the reason why the capitalists like AI is because they think that they can increase those numbers
Hmm.
in the financial account.
Yeah.
Um,
It can financialize it. It can turn it into money. Yeah.
yeah, that you could
Real money.
turn whatever the AI produces, you can turn it into money.
Yeah. Okay.
And now, okay, so the way how the capitalists sell it, that vision to us is to say, well, but at least, you get, you know, the sex robots, you get
Mm.
to write your college assignments.
You write your own
Using it.
novel.
Write your own novel with it, right?
Mhm.
Like I think at Amazon, which does the self-publishing platform, right? Which is where I put my own books.
Yeah.
They have a limit on a number of books that you can publish.
Oh, really?
I think you can publish 3 books per day.
Oh,
3 books
that's
per
so
day. Now,
generous. Generous.
yeah, I mean, so if you consider, I mean, like, so, like, even a prolific author, right? So there's someone like John Grisham, right? I think he writes like 2 novels per year, so one every half year. And that's considered to be prolific, right? Because of course, he writes it himself. He's like old school. But ever since the introduction of GPT, where you have people who are literally all they're doing is not writing novels, they're writing the prompts to the novels.
Mm,
And then in that way, they are self publishing dozens of books.
mhm.
And I think at some point, Amazon kind of found out about it. It's like, oh shit. So
Yeah.
we
But I put
can't
a
really be doing
cap on
this.
it, limit on it.
Yeah. So now we put a daily limit on it, right? Um,
Yeah. Well,
because because at some point it's like just spamming the platform, right?
yeah.
Um,
I guess AI has this momentum for trying to accelerate production, accelerate the speed of things, and it's yeah, it seems like that's what the technology is beneficial because think about like how long it would normally take somebody to put together a PowerPoint or write something, and now you've got this accelerated tool that allows you to just print out words, word count out of nothing, Uh, so yeah, so like I said, it has this potential. This is a powerful technology tool, but it has this negative side to it that it could infiltrate other spheres of life, other institutions we never thought of. it having an effect? For instance, young people, let's say if they're using it to socialize, and they don't go out anymore. People have always made that criticism about iPads, but that interferes a sphere of socialization, you would say?
Yeah. So,
Schooling, not normal schooling and versus just everything is synthetic.
well, we know that the social skills
Mhm.
of the young population is decreasing over time, right? And so this is argument by Jonathan Haidt, and he says that, basically the screen time has made the youth extremely anxious and socially inept. And he thinks that if we want to save our children, we have to basically give them as much of an analog life as the older generations used to enjoy, right?
Right, right.
I mean, you're a little bit older than me, so
Mhm.
so you remember the 80s, so like the
Oh yeah.
period before the rise of any, like, smartphones or
Well, well,
tablets.
well, we had
Um,
Nintendo console, 1985 was when the first Nintendo, but this is different bit, like 8-bit. I mean, it was really nothing compared to nowadays. But yeah, different
but were,
kinds.
were you still playing like with friends outside under the
Oh
sun?
yeah, more playground, definitely.
Yeah, so you were
There was
still doing
less
some things in the
less
playground.
screen, addiction to screen and television because you just didn't have so many television sets and a lot more outside activities. I can see that 80s, 90s, it started to shift entirely towards computer gameplay and uh, you know, music. You can listen to it just with headphones. But yeah, that makes a difference. And that technology changed also, I think, how young people communicated and how they interacted. Yeah, definitely. And of
Yeah,
course, talk to your grandparents, or if you have really old people, they'll tell you, yeah, things are really different from 1960, 70, and earlier times.
yeah. So I did remember there was this one interview with Bernie Sanders, and he was asked about his childhood, and he thought like the most formative period of his childhood days was when he was playing on the playground with the neighborhood kids, and they would be playing, with usually ball games, right? Team sports, um, and this was the most formative period because that's where you learned, how to play by the rules, right?
Hmm.
And this is like, was it George Herbert Mead, like the socialization argument, right?
Yeah, this role
Where
of the, you know, sign generalized other,
yeah,
yeah,
you have to learn
and
like your own
reference groups.
role.
Yeah,
You have to learn the role of other people, right, within the social organization, and that's I think where we feel as a species. I think that's where we feel at home, right?
yeah.
Basically, being active with the tribe,
Mm.
and then we operate within the rules of the tribe, and the tribe gives us the identity, right?
A little bit of mutualism, or mutual aid for one another. That could be another way to phrase it.
Yeah, and so basically, I
Yeah,
mean,
that's
we
kind
are.
of lost, I think, in AI because it's just perhaps individualized usage. I could be wrong. Groups could use it, but it seems like the play and playground does foster recognition of the other, and you have to physically recognize others. I mean, okay, you can see that on a Zoom meeting. I mean, you see me, I see you, but we're in different spaces and in different states. What? Maybe that spatial with a playground, it's actual physically going there, and physically, emotionally, you really are there, right? Spending time with others in a space that both people occupy. I'm getting really technical now, but I don't know how people can sometimes reproduce that with online video games. They do have online friends, they have play. It is synthetic play. My brother is one of those. He plays WoW, World of Warcraft, and some video games have an ability to produce an artificial kinship, artificial community, right? Right? It does, but it has still limitations, I think.
Yeah, I have a brother as well. I mean, he likes to play video games too. And but
Wow.
when you were mentioning like
Yeah, yeah,
the role of the other, I
yeah.
mean, I think that gets us back to Byung-Chul Han, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
He
Good
was
philosopher. You need to
yeah,
put that at the bottom of the YouTube. That way everybody knows the author. Share the link or
yeah,
yeah.
and he was kind of emphasizing the importance of the other, which I don't know from whom he took it. I mean, was it Heidegger? I mean, there was definitely some other philosopher. That
Communitarians, there's
there
Charles
was
Taylor, Politics of Recognition. This is in the realm of philosophy, actually, I think, if I recall correctly. Uh, but social psychology as well focuses on this,
yeah,
group dynamics. Yeah.
dynamics, yeah, and because in Hans' writing, I mean, it's very
Yeah.
pessimistic, right? Like a burnout society, and
Yeah.
people are being like completely overwhelmed by overwork and stuff like that, and individualization and alienation, right? All of these are like interconnected,
Mhm.
and and then the question to the philosopher is basically, well, what's the antidote, right? Like if you can diagnose what the problem is, what's the solution? And he's basically saying that it is a turn to the other, right? And basically,
Mhm.
like think of like a person having developing a relationship with another person, right? And that relationship, I mean, like, so now oftentimes, I mean, we think of like romantic relationships, sexual relationships. I mean, it's not the only one. I mean, I think
Mhm.
even something as basic as like friendship, right, that you develop, again, going back to the metaphor of that, playground experience as a young person, right?
Mhm.
That first um experience of like socialization, right? Where by interacting with these people on the playground, the other kids in the playground, you know, um, I learned the social rules, right? This Berger Luckman socialization argument,
Mhm.
but also I feel like I'm part of this group,
Yeah.
um, and um, and that's where you could say the the concerns about alienation, right? Um, and frustration, I mean, essentially gets dissolved, right?
Yeah.
In those moments, and um and then, okay, going back to this AI issue, it's like,
Yeah.
okay, how much can you turn towards the other, that is to say the dependence on other people effectively, um and the AI is not capable of matching that experience.
You nailed it. You nailed it. I think you nailed
Um,
it.
and that's why, I mean, but then at the same time, I mean, we're not able to get away from this, world of AI. I mean, I think it's going to stay with us. I mean, the benefits are just going to be so enormous.
Sounds like there's no alternative kind of thesis you're bringing
There's no alternative. Yeah,
in.
Tina, right?
There's
There's no
always a
alternative.
third way, right?
There's a third way. Yeah, well,
Giddens would say, right? But
yeah.
I think go ahead, go ahead. I was
What?
going to add something. Go ahead, go ahead.
Right, but that's why I mean, like with the climate change, is the same thing, right? It's like, well, can you like if you knew that in order to save the planet, you have to become more primitive, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Basically,
Or
less
Hermann,
consumption of resources.
Ulrike Hermann argument, right?
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, but
Start banning things. Ban AI.
start ban things. But we know that nobody's going to do it, right?
Yeah.
because well, we know that okay, less than 1%. Let's be more precise. Less than 1% of the people, let's say, are going to do it, right?
Yeah.
Because for
We,
the rest of the 99% of us, we're like I like to be running an AC. You know, what I mean, even like if especially if it gets hot like this, right?
mhm,
I want to be you know driving a car to work rather than basically wait for the unreliable public transportation, right?
yeah.
So, and it's just a climate issue. But then if you look at AI, it's the same thing where it's like I want to get my work done quickly, and I know AI can help me do that.
Mhm. But we'll still need to regulate it somehow. We'll have to decide on regulation of this tool like any other tool. Internet's regulated, highways are regulated when we drive on them. So yeah, that's the question of how much regulation.
Well,
Libertarians are not going to like it. I know it, but
well, the thing is that I think the U.S. principle is like we have to wait for the damage to happen.
yeah, the non-precautionary principles.
Right. It's like it's more it's not precautionary.
It's a
It's
faith-based, let's see what happens.
let's see what happens and then we regulate it. If things go south, then we'll figure something out.
But
And that's been the U.S. attitude. Uh,
unfortunately,
yeah.
yeah.
Okay.
But all right,
All
let's
right. So let's
close
call
it
the
up.
conversation to an end. Unless I mean you wanted to add something earlier. I mean,
No, one other thing I would add, because you're talking about the generalized other with AI. I think what's missing is mutualism, and it's built on an individualistic kind of usage model. So ultimately, as members of the community, we still have to think of ourselves as members of the community. And I think what happens with AI is what's called what's it, reification. We treat it as a thing, a thing that uh, it has benefits, but we lose control over it when we do that. I think that's what Pope was trying to get at. I think he was trying to he's coming from a conservative point of view, and he's the Pope of the Catholic Church, and he was like saying we will not be able to cancel politics out of AI. AI will have its political dimensions that will have to be politics is a necessity in that realm. We can't pretend like technology itself will solve the problems, and we have to think of politics as a real thing. So that's all I wanted to
well,
add.
the Pope has
Yeah.
another separate agenda, which
Of
is
course. Yeah, he's
he
religious
wants
and
people to be Catholic, and
no
he wants
no sex pods.
yeah, there's no
Yeah.
sex laws.
Uh,
He wants people to be obedient
yeah.
to his own institution.
But
Mm.
I when I watched the G7, I thought that was powerful lecture. He gave kind of like a speech lecture. I listened to his argument. They were like, yeah, that sounds like, yeah, that's a concern. And he goes in a variety of directions. He's a very well. Anybody can watch it, by the way, on YouTube. It's G7 Pope addressing AI technology. So I recommend it. That's
Yeah.
all I have.
I mean, and I think he's very much spot on, and it's
Mhm.
also quite ironic to say that. I mean, like Pope Francis. I mean, he's in his 80s, right? His mid
Yeah.
80s, already quite advanced in age. So he's really one of the few people that's like really remembering the analog period
Oh yeah.
in its fullness. And actually, I wrote a
Mhm.
comment after the false news about Noam Chomsky's demise came
Oh, I
out.
heard about that. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So no, Noam Chomsky, he's
He's
still
alive.
alive. He's
Yeah,
still
yeah, yeah.
alive. But there was this somebody probably within the social media basically put out the rumor effectively, and then
Yeah, that
everybody
was
retweeted
false.
it. And
He's
and
in
and I
Brazil, I
also
think. Brazil
made
right
that
now.
mistake. I said R.I.P. Noam Chomsky, but then but I decided not to delete the tweet because I said something else after that,
Mhm.
which is that like when ChatGPT came out, Noam Chomsky made a comment about GPT, and he said that It's basically a poor plagiarism device. Because if you think about it, I mean, what are the prompts eliciting from ChatGPT?
Mm,
It is eliciting the um the information that was put together by all of the humans that produced text in the past,
mm,
right? And so it's like an amalgamation of everything that people have written in human history, and it's been then being put together by the AI.
mhm,
And so, and for Chomsky, this is plagiarism, and he thinks that humans thinking is all about creativity. It's about taking the existing pieces and making them something new.
mm,
And now, but then there's this counter argument that, well, I mean, AI can also be creative because ultimately, you know, like if you put it to turn it in, I mean, you might not find anything, even though it's a chat GPT essay, right? Because um it does similar to the humans, I mean, it is combining existing ideas,
mm.
but using different phrasing, different inflection, and giving it a new flair, right?
So you don't think it's anti-intellectual then, as a device? It's not conformist. You think it could also be revolutionary and like intellectual, creative? It's not necessarily something anti-intellectual that everybody uses it. Everybody depends on AI and everybody writes their homework with it and everybody is dependent on it. That it could be seen as something that it can go both ways. It could be
No, but
agency.
but but
Right?
but I think
Yeah,
it's a larger point
yeah,
where I mean,
yeah,
so with a detailed argument, I mean, I might disagree a little bit with Chomsky,
yeah,
but the larger argument of
yeah.
basically regarding this piece of technology as something negative, as something that can reduce our you could say autonomy as humans, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, where if we reify it as you call it,
Yeah, thingify, turn it into a
um,
thing. Well, we
right?
lose authorship over it. We just turn it as treat it as a thing.
Yeah. So I mean, the way how I describe it, like the brain is basically like a muscle, right?
Yeah.
It's use it or lose it. So that so if let's say if you learned a foreign language as a child, and then you grow up as an adult, and then you don't speak it anymore, and then you kind of forget about most of it, right? So then you cannot speak it anymore. But sometimes, like if you listen to it on the radio, then you might be like, okay, I can recognize these words again, right?
Yeah.
But still, I mean, you lose the fluency in it because you have not used it for a long time, right? And so use it or lose it. And this thing is that okay, again, AI in education. If we say to our students, we want you to write the essay yourself,
Mm.
but you're going to be using the GPT. So now, unlike the previous generation of students, right?
I had to write it on. Yeah.
You're not going to be learning proper writing skills. I mean, you're going to learn prompt writing skills, which is a skill too,
That'll work.
but you're not going to
Programming
be.
again, coding.
Yeah, well, the coding is getting automated. Actually, I mean, you
Yeah.
just have to know the prompt, and then the code will be produced for you, right? Um, but you're going to be losing the um the ability to write the whole paper yourself, right? And that is, I think, a huge loss. And it will get to a point where the only intelligent creature is going to be AI,
Mm.
and the biological humans are going to be stupid. I mean,
That's
that's
that's a crazy. Yeah. So
that,
like a
that
technological fascism, would you use that word? Technological fascism? AI could become totalitarian? No? Like it
yeah, I mean, well,
deterministic or whatever words you want to use?
it could come to dominate us, and then but there might be a few exceptions. I mean, think of people who, you know, if the people who do things the old-fashioned way, I mean, think of like, because
Mhm.
I mean, you have like the books behind you, right? So you still read the paper copies, right?
Yeah, I get
And
paper
and
newspapers too.
yeah, and I do the same thing now. I mean, I try to read the paper books.
Mhm.
So, if we are doing things the old-fashioned way, then we still have these old-fashioned skills. Um, and so, we can maybe maintain, like the cognitive
Mhm.
production that we have.
Intellectual role, right?
Yeah. But for the people deciding not to do it, the people who are saying, well, right now it's more comfortable for me to let ChatGPT do most of the work for me because I want to save myself some time. I don't want to waste my time on this assignment. I think that the yeah, it's a social it's a new version of social stratification,
Would you call
basically.
that AI realism versus AI idealism or something? If you had to phrase it, would you, like there's people that have realistic usage of the AI. I'm using it for benefit gain. Other people have more of an idealistic kind of practical or non-practical. But with the academics, it seems to be AI realism. Like it's a thing that people use for an advantage or yeah.
Yeah, I mean
I'm just I'm just conceptualizing now. I don't know if
yeah, it's a
that
tool of enhancement for sure,
yeah, it's definitely
but then again, it's like use it or lose it. So
yeah.
we are not using certain parts of our brain. If we're saying we put in the prompt,
Mhm.
it spits out this result. We don't have to think about, what went into producing that output.
Yeah. And we're
Um,
shortcutting ourselves.
we're shortcutting. I mean, we are not developing these certain neuronal pathways. And if we do not use these neuronal pathways, um, it's just that just is going to die out, right? And you know, and we haven't seen the end of that, right? I mean, what's the final implication of that, right? Um, are we going to subsist as a species then at the end of that
No, no, you're good.
process? Um,
There's
that that
there
that is
no maybe after we quit, I want to show you a book.
okay. All right,
Yeah.
okay, yeah. Then let's call it an end, and then
Yeah.
thank you very much, Mike,
Yeah. Good.
for joining me
It was
onto this
awesome.
podcast.